Hello, and welcome to the Snoozy Scientist. Wherever you are tonight, whether you're winding down from a long day or searching for something soothing to fall asleep to, I'm so glad you're here. Tonight we are traveling back more than 60 million years to a moment when Earth was beginning again. The dinosaurs were gone, but the world they left behind did not fall into silence. It unraveled into something stranger. For a brief chapter in Earth's history, life rose from the ashes of extinction with a creativity so bold that scientists still struggle to understand it. Fossil evidence reveals a greenhouse planet hotter and wetter than almost anything the modern world has seen. Dense forests wrapped the poles, warm oceans pulsed with new currents, rain fell in what are now deserts, and in this warm, reshaping world, mammals did something extraordinary. Once tiny and hidden in the shadows, they surged into empty ecological space and grew into shapes evolution never used again. Some became heavy, lumbering herbivores with skulls as long as a human torso. Others became high-stepping browsers with claws built for pulling entire branches from towering trees. There were broad-shouldered giants that moved like gorillas, yet were more closely related to horses. There were enormous plant eaters with mountain-like horns that stood apart from every lineage alive today. Predators followed the same pattern. Early carnivores developed long, narrow skulls fit for bone grinding. Giant birds rose to the top of food webs and may have hunted in powerful ambushes. Along ancient coastlines, the ancestors of whales walked and swam in the same breath, leaving behind one of the most remarkable transitions in the fossil record. This forgotten age lasted for tens of millions of years. Entire families of mammals rose to great size, dominated continents, and then vanished forever when climates cooled and forests receded. Researchers believe this chapter holds clues to why modern mammals look and behave the way they do. It is a key to understanding our ancient world, yet most people never hear its story. But why did mammals rise so quickly in the aftermath of extinction? What made evolution test shapes and strategies it never tried again? How did these strange giants thrive on a planet that was changing beneath their feet? And what quiet shift finally brought this surreal era to an end? Tonight, we drift into the beginnings of this remarkable chapter, following the clues left in bones, rocks, and ancient landscapes that have only recently been understood. But before we begin, if you enjoy slow, soothing explorations like this one, calming journeys through the wonders of science, I would be grateful if you gave this video a gentle like and perhaps tapped subscribe. It helps other curious minds find this peaceful little corner of the internet and lets the algorithm know that sleep and science go perfectly together. And if you would be so kind, let me know in the comments, where are you winding down from tonight, and what time is it there? It is always a joy to see how far across the world this little sleepy corner of science travels. So now take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and together let us step softly into the strangest age of mammals the world has ever known. In the quiet that followed the Great Impact, Earth seemed to hold its breath. The world had been shaken to its core, and for a time the land felt strangely hollow, as if waiting for life to decide what to do with the emptiness left behind. The great reptiles that once shaped entire ecosystems were gone, leaving behind a planet covered in ash, fractured stone, and silences that stretched across continents. Yet even in these first uncertain moments, small hints of renewal were already beginning to take shape. The first million years after the asteroid passed like a long sigh, daylight slowly softened again, filtered through a sky still touched by lingering dust. Soft rains fell across barren ground, washing away the last remnants of the disaster. Rivers carved new paths as if rewriting the map of the world. Oceans grew warmer, stirred by gentle currents that carried nutrients from deep layers back toward the surface. Volcanic heat mixed with sunlight and water, creating pockets of warmth that encouraged microscopic life to bloom once more. Bit by bit, Earth's rhythms began to settle. In the midst of this slow healing, mammals moved through the quiet spaces the reptiles had left behind. They had always lived close to the edges of the world, tucked into burrows, hidden in roots, climbing in shadows. Now they stepped into open ground that had not been truly open in tens of millions of years. They were still small creatures, most no larger than the size of a modern house cat, yet their resilience carried them forward. They searched for seeds, insects, and fresh shoots. They sheltered under fallen trunks and in the hollows of newly eroded cliffs. Every movement was cautious, but there was room to breathe in a way that had never existed before. Across the continents, tiny green shoots began to appear. At first they were sparse, trembling in landscapes that still carried scars. But the climate had grown warm, and the warmth nurtured life with a surprising gentleness. Ferns unfurled their delicate fronds, grasses crept outward in thin patches, shrubs reached for the sun with quiet determination. Over time, these small pioneers grew bolder. They spread across floodplains, climbed the sides of cooling volcanoes, and settled around lakes that had formed in the wake of the asteroid's shock waves. As these early plant communities expanded, they changed the air itself. The rising greenery began releasing fresh oxygen, and the atmosphere slowly carried more of the gas that animals needed to grow larger and move with greater energy. The shift was gradual, almost imperceptible from one generation to the next, yet it shaped an entirely new future. The air grew richer, breathing became easier, and with each passing century, the world felt a little more open to possibility. Forests soon followed. They did not appear all at once. They arrived tree by tree, seed by seed, until clusters of tall plants created shadowed sanctuaries where soil could deepen and roots could weave into the ground. Warmth wrapped the continents, encouraging these forests to reach across vast stretches of land. Young canopies shimmered with new leaves. Fallen branches created tiny shelters for the mammals that had survived the long night. Insects hummed through the soft air, reclaiming their ancient roles in recycling and renewal. As the forests became denser, mammals found new ways to live within them. Some climbed, using nimble limbs to explore branches that were rich with food and safety. Others remained close to the forest floor, where thick layers of fallen leaves hid seeds, fungi, and insects. Their senses sharpened, their diets expanded. Slowly, their bodies began to change in response to the growing abundance around them. With more oxygen in the air and more resources on the ground, evolution offered them new possibilities. Their lungs grew stronger, their muscles more capable, their bones able to support larger frames. The changes were tiny at first, far too subtle for any one creature to notice, but across many lifetimes, the shift was unmistakable. The world was no longer the planet the dinosaurs had ruled. It was warmer, softer, and more welcoming to creatures that lived closer to the soil. Storms passed across newly formed coastlines with heavy but nourishing rain. Winds carried seeds over mountains that had been reshaped by ancient shock waves. The sun rose through a sky that had finally cleared, spreading gentle light over continents that were now ready to grow again. Mammals moved through this changing world with quiet persistence. They made homes within the roots of growing forests. They scurried through grasses that had not existed before the impact. They filled small niches with creativity and caution. With each passing generation, the descendants of these survivors carried the earliest hints of what they would one day become. The planet was healing, and in its healing, it offered them a chance to step into a new identity. As forests thickened and the air grew richer, the stage was slowly set for a remarkable rise. Larger bodies would soon be supported by the renewed atmosphere. New behaviors would unfold in the safety of deepening woods, and in the gentle warmth of a recovering earth, mammals were learning that the world had space for them at last. As the first million years of recovery drifted into the past, Earth entered a new rhythm. The air no longer carried the sharp scent of ash. Oceans glimmered with deeper shades of blue. Forests, once scattered and tentative, had begun to gather strength. With every passing century, the planet eased into a gentler warmth that wrapped the continents in thick blankets of green. This was the Paleocene, a chapter that carried the quiet hum of beginnings. The continents themselves were arranged in a way that feels familiar yet distant. North America and Europe were still close enough for life to pass between them, connected by ancient land bridges that flickered in and out of existence as sea levels rose and fell. Greenland sat farther south than it does today, catching sunlight that fed dense forests. South America drifted alone, isolated and fertile, while Africa moved steadily toward Eurasia. Australia remained a world apart, its edges lined with forests that held secrets found nowhere else. Antarctica, still free of ice, carried warm rainforests across its cliffs and valleys. Every continent breathed with heavy humidity, and the sky carried the scent of wet leaves and soil. This arrangement shaped winds, guided storms, and channeled warm ocean currents in sweeping arcs. Those currents moved like slow rivers across the seas, pulling heat from the equator and sending it toward the poles. They kept winters mild and summers steady. They softened the edges of the world, allowing rainforests to spread across nearly every region. There were no frozen continents, no polar ice, only a greenhouse planet filled with deep shadows and shimmering green light. Within these forests, rain fell often, sometimes in gentle mists that hung between branches, sometimes in steady sheets that drenched the ground. Moisture clung to everything. The air felt heavy, almost sweet, carrying the fragrance of resin, sap, and blooming life. Plants responded with remarkable vigor. Ferns unfurled into wide carpets. Mosses softened the bases of ancient trees. Vines climbed toward sunlight in tangled spirals. Layer upon layer of vegetation rose upward until the canopy formed a near unbroken roof over much of the planet. This sudden richness led to an explosion in plant diversity. Leaves split into new shapes, some thin and delicate, others broad and sturdy. Flowers evolved in quiet bursts, experimenting with colors and scents. Seeds traveled on wind, on water, and on the fur of small animals that brushed past them. So many different forms appeared that entire landscapes changed from one era to the next. Grass had not yet taken over the world, so forests and shrublands ruled, stretching from tropical shores to cool northern plateaus. In the dim light beneath the canopy, the forest floor became a world of its own. Soft soil gathered under a deep layer of fallen leaves. Mushrooms glowed faintly with pale colors. Rotting wood formed bridges, shelters, and hiding places. New ecosystems rose from these small corners, each shaped by the plants that dominated the sky above. This surge of plant life guided the next steps in mammal evolution. The small survivors of the earlier age moved through forests that were unlike anything their ancestors had known. There were more fruits, more seeds, more leaves, and more insects than before. Every tree trunk offered climbing routes. Every branch held food. Every fallen log created a tunnel of safety. Mammals soon adapted to this abundance. Some developed stronger limbs for climbing. Others expanded their diets, tasting new leaves and fruits that earlier generations had never encountered. Their bodies shifted in subtle ways, influenced by the plants that surrounded them. As forests grew taller and denser, they also shaped the flow of light. Much of the day was spent in soft shadow, with sunbeams slipping through leaves in thin, shimmering lines. Mammals living in this dim world sharpened their senses. Their eyes learned to catch movement in low light. Their ears tracked the soft rustle of wings or feet brushing against bark. Their noses guided them through thickets rich with hidden fruit and blooming flowers. The diversity of plants did more than change how animals moved and fed. It changed the pace of evolution itself. Forest created countless microhabitats, each offering different opportunities. Some mammals settled high in the branches and found security in height. Others traveled the ground and discovered roots, bulbs, and insects beneath the soil. With so many ecological paths available, life diverged again and again, branching into new forms that would one day shape the future of the Cenozoic world. Throughout the Paleocene, the planet felt alive in a way that seemed almost restless. New plants appeared faster than old ones vanished. Forests climbed mountain slopes that had once been bare. Riverbanks filled with reeds and early flowering shrubs. Even coasts and marshlands became lush with unusual trees that dipped their roots into warm, shallow waters. The world that emerged from this quiet revolution was softer, greener, and warmer than anything that had come before. In the shadows of a planet reborn, life prepared for the next great wave of change. The foundations of future mammal evolution were settling into place, shaped by leaves, sunlight, and the steady pulse of a greenhouse Earth. As the Paleocene forests thickened and the air grew warm and steady, something subtle began to shift among the mammals that wandered through the shadows. The tiny survivors of the earlier age had already learned to navigate a world filled with new leaves, fruits, and insects. Now the forests offered them more than safety and food. They offered space, they offered time, and in this gentle abundance, evolution began its first bold experiments in size. The earliest large mammals did not appear all at once. They rose slowly, carried by generations that pressed a little farther into the possibilities of their new world. Among the first were creatures like Pantolambda, an animal shaped by softness and resilience. At a glance, it might remind one of a bear or a tapir, though it belonged to none of those lineages. It moved through the undergrowth with a steady gait, its rounded body supported by limbs that were strong but not built for speed. Its teeth hinted at a diet that could shift with the seasons, allowing it to feed on leaves, fruits, or tender shoots as needed. Pantolambda was not immense, yet compared to its ancestors, it felt like a giant stepping out of a miniature world. It carried itself with a weight that earlier mammals had never possessed, and that weight changed the way it interacted with the forest floor. Each footfall pressed deeper into the soil, leaving shallow impressions that filled with water after rain. In those impressions grew new plants, nourished by the disturbed earth. Even in its movement, this creature shaped the land around it. Other lineages followed the same quiet path. Some evolved broader ribs that allowed them to draw in more air, supported by the rising oxygen of the Paleocene atmosphere. Others developed larger stomachs that could process tougher vegetation. Muscles strengthened across generations, and bones thickened in response to the demands of heavier bodies. Size became a gentle tide, lifting species into new forms without urgency or haste. One of the most striking results of this shift was Coryphodon, a heavy, hippo-sized herbivore that wandered near rivers and swamps. Its wide feet spread its weight across soft ground, and its broad mouth gathered dense vegetation with slow, deliberate motions. Its life was shaped by water and mud, where danger was rare and plants were plentiful. Coryphodon carried a calm sturdiness, a sense that its body was designed for a world without predators, large enough to trouble it. The forests and riverbanks of the Paleocene were filled with creatures like these, each slightly larger than the mammals that came before, each shaped by the opportunities of a planet reborn. Their growth was not simply a matter of abundance, it was a response to the new balance of the ancient world. Becoming larger offered many advantages. A heavy body could process coarse vegetation that smaller mammals found difficult to digest. Size meant strength, which helped individuals push through dense undergrowth, reach higher leaves, and travel across uneven or muddy terrain. Larger animals could regulate their internal temperature more easily, holding warmth through cool nights and releasing it slowly under the high canopy. Their bodies became stable vessels in a changing climate. There was safety in size as well. Even though the great reptilian predators had vanished, smaller threats remained. Birds with sharp beaks hunted in silence. Mammalian carnivores were beginning their own evolutionary journey. In such a world, a creature that stood taller and weighed more could rely on presence alone. A strong frame discouraged conflict. A deep chest and powerful limbs allowed for a slow but steady defense. Many early herbivores lived lives of patience, knowing their bodies gave them the confidence to move without fear. The growth of these animals also reshaped their environments. Larger herbivores cleared pathways through the forests. They broke branches while foraging. They disturbed soil and carried seeds across long distances. Slowly, they became part of the machinery that maintained the ecosystems rising around them. Their feeding patterns guided plant distribution. Their movements created networks of trails that other creatures followed. Their presence influenced the future of the Paleocene world in ways that were quiet but profound. As these early giants settled into their roles, the landscape around them shifted in harmony. Forests adjusted to the weight of their footsteps. Rivers carved deeper channels where heavy bodies entered the water. Plants evolved tougher stems and thicker leaves, learning to survive under the pressure of grazing. A gentle dialogue unfolded between life and land, each shaping the other across countless seasons. With each new species that grew larger, evolution explored a different approach to survival. Some bodies became taller, others became broader. Some legs lengthened for walking across open floodplains, others shortened for stability in soft marshes. The Paleocene became a gallery of experiments, each creature carrying the echo of ancient survival, mixed with the promise of a future not yet written. These early giants were the first hints of what mammals could become. They were not the final shapes of the Cenozoic world, but they were the opening strokes of a much larger story. In their slow steps and quiet grazing, the foundations of the age of mammals were laid, rooted in the deep green forests that covered a warm and thriving earth. In the deepening Paleocene forests, where early giants grazed and the air lay warm over thickets of ferns and young flowering plants, another transformation was unfolding. The world was no longer shaped by the thunder of reptilian hunters. The sharp roars and heavy footfalls that once dominated the land had faded into memory. In their absence, mammals began to explore roles that had never belonged to them before. Predation, once ruled by teeth of impossible size and bodies built for speed, now belonged to creatures far smaller and softer than their predecessors. Yet they carried a quiet determination, guided by new instincts rising through generations. Among the first true mammalian hunters was Mesonyx, a creature that moved with a strange blend of confidence and caution. Its body resembled a wolf, shaped by unfamiliar hands, with limbs that hinted at speed and a head that carried a long, narrow snout. Its teeth, unlike anything seen in modern mammals, were built in part for slicing and in part for crushing, a blend of abilities born from a world still deciding what a mammalian predator should be. Mesonyx belonged to a group known as the Mesonychids, early hoofed predators that stepped into the shadows left behind by vanished reptiles. They did not yet have the powerful jaws of later carnivores or the streamlined grace of swift hunters. Instead, they relied on patience. They watched the movement of herbivores through low vegetation. They listened for soft cracks of branches and faint rustles in the distance. When they moved, it was with deliberate steps, each one placed carefully to avoid unnecessary sound. These early predators were learning to navigate a world where the rules of hunting were being rewritten. Without towering reptiles to overshadow them, they could explore open floodplains, forest edges, and the banks of shallow rivers. Their senses sharpened as they adapted to new challenges. Their eyes adjusted to the complex light, filtering through the canopy. Their noses traced the winding paths of scent left on damp leaves. Their ears caught vibrations through the stillness of early morning air. Not all hunters relied purely on carnivory. In the Paleocene, many predators began as omnivorous generalists, creatures that shifted their diets with the seasons and the landscape. Some ate insects when fruit was scarce. Others relied on roots and small animals, blending foraging with opportunistic hunting. This flexibility allowed them to survive in a world that was still finding its rhythm. The abundance of plants, seeds, and small prey made versatility a powerful trait. One could imagine these early omnivores moving through the forest with a calm adaptability. A fallen tree might offer beetles or larvae, a shrub might hold berries. A small mammal might dart from behind a cluster of leaves, offering a quick meal if the hunter reacted swiftly. These creatures were not yet specialists. They were explorers, testing the boundaries of what a mammal could eat and how it could survive among growing competition. The absence of reptilian hunters changed the very structure of predation. Mammals no longer needed to outpace enormous predators. Instead, they learned to track, stalk, and anticipate. Their bodies evolved for endurance rather than pure speed. Their limbs grew longer, their spines more flexible, and their movements more controlled. Hunting became a matter of timing, a quiet pause, a measured step, a sudden burst of strength. As generations passed, early hoofed predators refined their methods. Some began traveling in loose groups, not yet coordinated like later pack hunters, but comfortable enough to share territory and follow similar paths. Others remained solitary, marking out wide ranges and forests that still held mysteries beyond the reach of sunlight. The landscapes themselves carried traces of these experiments. Soft mud along riverbanks held the imprints of hooves shaped for pursuit rather than grazing. Scattered bones showed the marks of teeth that blended crushing power with slicing capability. Trails wound between trees, pressed into the soil by predators that patrolled the same routes day after day, learning the patterns of the life around them. Without reptilian competition, these mammals unlocked new strategies. They used intelligence rather than brute force. They observed before acting. They adapted quickly to changes in prey behavior, climate, and plant growth. Their bodies and minds expanded the possibilities of mammalian life, setting the foundation for carnivorous lineages that would one day become far more specialized. In time, the Paleocene became a world where predator and prey moved in a delicate balance. Heavy herbivores grazed in calm herds, while Mesonex and its relatives watched from the shadows. Omnivores wandered between roles, thriving on whatever the moment offered. The forests echoed with soft footfalls instead of thunderous charges. The hunt became a quieter art, guided by patience, awareness, and the slow gathering of skill. In this gentle but transformative age, mammals discovered how to hunt in their own way. No longer overshadowed by colossal reptiles, they stepped into their own evolutionary story, shaping the early foundations of predation with every silent step taken under the warm Paleocene sun. As the Paleocene gave way to the Eocene, Earth drifted into a warmth deeper and more expansive than anything the early mammals had yet experienced. The air held a richness that shaped every breath, for carbon dioxide levels rose to heights unseen since the age of the great reptiles. Sunlight lingered long and bright, and the planet responded with a bloom of life that reached across continents and seas. This new warmth did not come suddenly. It gathered over many thousands of years, folding gently into the atmosphere and spreading its influence through winds, clouds, and ocean currents. With each passing century, the world became more tropical. Humidity rose. Rain fell in heavier, more frequent rhythms. Dense forests, already strong from Paleocene growth, swelled into vast realms that covered nearly every corner of the planet. At the poles, where winter once brought long shadows and stillness, something extraordinary unfolded. Antarctica and the Arctic transformed into warm, rain soaked forests filled with towering trees and thick undergrowth. Mosses carpeted the damp soil. Ferns grew in wide fans along riverbanks. Broad-leafed plants reached upward to catch sunlight that no longer felt distant or weak. The polar air, softened by warmth, allowed forests to thrive uninterrupted through seasons that remained mild even during the longest nights. These polar rainforests pulsed with life. Rivers wound through soft earth, carving quiet channels lined with reeds. Insects filled the air with delicate motion. Early birds settled among branches that were heavy with leaves. Mammals traveled along ancient root systems, exploring territories that earlier ages could never have supported. Even in these far northern and southern realms, the world felt lush and inviting. Across the equatorial regions, the transformation was even more dramatic. Thick jungles formed canopies so dense that sunlight reached the ground only in shimmering threads. Vines twisted across tree trunks, linking branches in high bridges that swayed gently with the movement of animals. Flowers bloomed in deep shades of orange, red, and purple. Their scents filled the humid air, drawing insects and early pollinators into complex dances. Forests, wetlands, and warm shallow seas blended into a continuous tapestry of green and gold. This immense warmth reshaped every ecosystem it touched. Oceans became rich with life, stirred by currents that carried heat far beyond their usual paths. Coral reefs expanded, creating underwater worlds of delicate structure. Shallow coastlines supported grasses and shrubs that dipped their roots into warm salt water. Inland, great lakes mirrored the sky and held ecosystems of their own, filled with plants and small amphibious mammals that waded through quiet shallows. For the mammals that had begun their rise in the Paleocene, the Eocene offered a landscape filled with new possibilities. Abundance surrounded them. Vegetation grew thick and constant, allowing herbivorous mammals to expand into larger, more specialized forms. Some became nimble tree dwellers, their limbs lengthening to grip branches with confidence. Others grew heavier and more grounded, feeding on dense leaves and fruits that flourished under the greenhouse sky. Predators adapted as well. With forests stretching across continents, stealth became a valuable skill. Hunters learned to move silently through foliage, using shadows as their allies. Their bodies refined into shapes that allowed them to slip between trees or leap across low brush. Some developed sharper senses to track prey by sound and scent. Others grew more agile, navigating the uneven terrain with careful precision. The warm climate also influenced the rhythm of life. Seasons blurred together, losing the sharp contrasts that shape temperate worlds. Food remained available nearly year-round, encouraging animals to explore new behaviors. Some mammals developed traits suited for a life lived high above the ground. Others became more social, finding safety and opportunity in small groups. With fewer environmental pressures to limit experimentation, evolution tested form after form, letting the world fill with diversity. This tropical Earth carried a softness that extended across great distances. Storms passed gently through forests. Rivers flowed with steady warmth. Even the nights held a mildness that allowed nocturnal life to flourish. Many mammals grew larger eyes to navigate the dim glow beneath moonlit canopies. Others sharpened their hearing to detect movement in the stillness. The Eocene world was one of continuous renewal. Plant life reproduced quickly, sending seeds across wind, water, and animal fur. Animals migrated through corridors of vegetation that seemed endless. The land gained deeper layers of soil, enriched by the constant cycle of growth and decay. Over time, the ecosystems of this era would shape countless lineages that continued far beyond its warm peak. As the Eocene settled into its full strength, Earth carried the feeling of a great tropical garden spread across the entire planet. It was a world held in gentle equilibrium, where warmth wrapped every continent and life expanded into forms that had never been seen before. In this global greenhouse, mammals found room to grow, forests found space to reach the sky, and ancient coastlines glowed beneath a sun that warmed the entire surface of the earth with an even and generous light. As the Eocene warmth settled across the world, the forests that had risen during earlier ages continued to thicken, weaving an unbroken green canopy across continents. Sunlight filtered through leaves in soft, shifting patterns. Rivers wandered slowly between ancient tree trunks. Herds of early mammals moved through this vast landscape, shaping it with their quiet journeys. Among them, a new kind of giant began to appear, one that carried the first true hint of the towering herbivores that would one day define entire ecosystems. These were the brontotheres, the great thunder creatures of the early Cenozoic. Brontotheres were distant relatives of horses and tapirs, though anyone seeing them in life would never mistake them for either. Their bodies rose much higher than the small grazing ancestors that roamed before them. Their limbs were thick and sturdy, built to carry immense weight over long distances. Their backs formed broad, gentle slopes, and their chests expanded with deep breaths that held the warm Eocene air. Moving through the forests and open woodlands, they carried a sense of calm power, as if each step recognized the stability their size provided. Early brontotheres were not yet the towering forms they would become. They began modestly, with bodies larger than most mammals of their time but still finding their place in the world. Across generations, they continued to grow. Their bones lengthened, their shoulders broadened, their legs strengthened with each evolutionary step, adapting to landscapes filled with dense vegetation and winding rivers. Life rewarded the species that could reach higher leaves and travel farther in search of new grazing grounds, and brontotheres followed that path with quiet persistence. Their most striking feature was their skull. Even in the earliest forms, the head carried hints of unusual shapes that would become more pronounced as time went on. The skulls were long and heavy, supported by thick neck muscles that anchored deeply into their shoulders. Many brontotheres developed horn structures unlike anything seen in earlier mammals. These horns did not resemble the single curved shape of later rhinoceroses. Instead, they began as small bumps above the nose, paired and symmetrical, like twin rises of bone emerging from the skull. With time, these small projections grew larger and more elaborate. Some species formed long, forked horns that curved gently upward, while others developed thick, blunt formations that pointed forward. The horns were not solid bone, they were shaped by layers of bone growing outward, supported by a strong internal framework. Scientists believe these horns were used for display or gentle contests of strength. When males faced one another, they may have pressed and twisted their horns, testing their resilience while avoiding serious injury. The horns signaled health, age, and confidence, all quietly communicated through their shape and size. The The face of a brontothere carried a look of steady awareness. Their eyes sat high enough to watch for movement, while their mouths gathered leaves, twigs, and soft shoots from shrubs and small trees. They fed on vegetation that grew at shoulder height, choosing plants tougher than those favored by smaller mammals. Their large molars were built for grinding, pressing fibers into digestible pieces. Every meal required patience. Every mouthful held the texture of a forest that had grown thicker and more varied with each century. Their size gave them advantages that shaped entire ecosystems. Few animals dared approach a fully grown brontothere, for its weight alone offered protection. Even without sharp horns or threatening behavior, the sheer mass of these creatures made them dominant herbivores. Predators found easier prey among smaller mammals. The brontotheres could graze slowly and peacefully, knowing that little in the Eocene world posed a true threat. Their presence changed the land. Paths formed where these giants traveled day after day. Young trees bent beneath their reach, shaping patches of forest into more open spaces. Their heavy bodies pressed seeds into the soil, encouraging the growth of new plants behind them. Riversides, where brontotheres gathered, became rich with vegetation that thrived on disturbed soil and constant fertilization. Forest edges opened into sunlit fields where grasses were beginning their first tentative steps into evolution. Brontotheres lived in herds, moving through the warm landscape with gentle cohesion. Calves stayed close to the adults, learning the pathways between feeding grounds and resting places. Older individuals guided the group, their horns catching the morning light as they passed beneath tall branches. The sounds of their movement were soft and rhythmic, a steady drumming against soil that had been warmed by endless summers. As the Eocene continued to unfold, brontotheres grew larger still, reaching sizes that rivaled or surpassed the great mammals that would come after them. Their horns became more elaborate. Their bodies adapted to environments that shifted from dense forests to open woodlands. They became symbols of the early Cenozoic, living bridges between the small survivors of the Paleocene and the towering mammals that would one day roam the planet. In their quiet dominance, they defined an age that celebrated growth, warmth, and abundance. Their footsteps marked the evolving heartbeat of an earth finding new rhythm, and in their towering silhouettes, cast across sunlit landscapes, one could see the first great giants of a world learning to dream again. As the Eocene warmth wrapped the world in deep greens and shifting blues, life along the coastlines began to follow a new rhythm. Rivers emptied into sheltered bays. Tides swept gently across wide mudflats. Warm shallows shimmered under soft sunlight, carrying the scent of salt, algae, and drifting plant matter. It was in these quiet borderlands, where land met sea in long, winding curves, that one of the most remarkable transformations in mammal history began to unfold. Among the creatures that explored these places was Ambulocetus, a mammal whose body carried echoes of two worlds at once. Its name means walking whale, and it lived up to that image with a shape both familiar and unexpected. At first glance, it resembled a crocodile shaped by mammalian ancestry. Its limbs were strong and broad, able to support its weight on land, yet flexible enough to push through water with steady power. Its tail was long and muscular, though not yet the sweeping fluke that later whales would develop. Its body moved with a strange grace, shifting from lumbering steps on shore to smooth undulations once it slipped beneath the surface. Ambulocetus lived along rivers and coastal wetlands where fresh water mingled with salt. These environments offered gentle currents and slow-moving fish, perfect for an animal learning to hunt in ways no mammal had attempted before. On land, It walked with the firm, deliberate gait of a predator used to stalking. In water, it moved with quiet patience, letting the mild flow carry it toward passing prey. Its long snout held teeth shaped for gripping slippery fish. Its eyes sat high on its skull, allowing it to watch the world from beneath the surface, much like modern crocodiles. When submerged, Ambulocetus could remain almost perfectly still. Only the smallest ripples betrayed its presence as it waited for a fish, a turtle, or even a small land animal that wandered too close to the water's edge. Hunting in shallow waters required a blend of strength and timing. Ambulocetus would glide forward with a slow sweep of its limbs, then launch its body with a sudden surge. The movement was not as swift as the leaps of later ocean predators, but in the quiet backwaters of the Eocene it was enough. Its powerful jaws closed around prey with firm precision. Once caught, the animal dragged its meal to a place where it could rest and feed without struggle. This style of hunting began a shift that rippled far beyond the muddy banks where Ambulocetus lived. It marked the beginning of a lineage that would one day return fully to the sea. Each generation adapted a little more to water. Limbs grew stronger for swimming, backs became more flexible. The need for speed and maneuverability encouraged bodies to streamline. Over time, the descendants of Ambulocetus would lose their ability to walk on land, gaining thick tails, powerful flukes, and the deep diving abilities that define modern whales. But for now, Ambulocetus lived in the in-between. Its world was neither entirely terrestrial nor fully marine. It rested on sun-warmed sandbars during the day, leaving shallow tracks that disappeared when tides rose. It swam through gentle currents beneath overhanging branches, chasing fish that scattered like glimmers of silver. It listened to the hum of its environment, learning to read vibrations that traveled through water with clarity and depth. This transition toward aquatic life reshaped the ecosystems around it, with mammals beginning to explore rivers and coastlines as hunters. Competition in the water changed. Predatory roles once held by reptiles or large fish now included mammals that could adapt quickly, reproduce efficiently, and respond to environmental shifts with unusual flexibility. As the lineage of walking whales grew more specialized, their bodies unlocked new ecological possibilities. They could hunt prey that traveled at different depths. They could venture into colder or warmer waters. They could follow migrations, currents, and seasonal changes with a range unmatched by many earlier predators. Ambulocetus was not the largest creature of its time, nor the most fearsome, yet its journey into the water marked the beginning of a profound transformation. The oceans of the Eocene were still warm and richly populated, filled with fish, early sharks, and soft-bodied creatures that drifted with the tides. As mammals entered these waters, the balance of life began to shift. New predators encouraged new defenses. New hunting patterns shaped the movement of prey. Rivers became pathways for exploration, and coastlines became gateways to deeper parts of the sea. The emergence of Ambulocetus opened a door that would never close. It carried the first strong steps of a lineage that would learn to dive into darkness, navigate by sound, and grow to sizes unmatched by any animal on land. Yet in these early days, it remained a creature of shallows and sunlight, moving between worlds as tides whispered against ancient shores. In its slow, powerful swim, one can imagine the spark of an oceanic future beginning to take form, held gently in the warm embrace of the Eocene seas. As the early Eocene world continued to warm and flourish, forests and open woodlands stretched across continents in soft, unbroken waves of green. Herds of rising herbivores moved slowly through this landscape, stepping between ferns and young flowering shrubs. Predatory mammals hunted along the edges of rivers or through dense thickets, still refining the skills that would one day shape their descendants. But during this age of experimentation, the crown of land predator did not always belong to mammals. For a brief and remarkable moment, the role of apex hunter passed instead to the birds. Among these powerful birds, none stood with more quiet authority than Gastornis. It was a giant, taller than a person, with a body built on strong, pillar-like legs. Its presence alone changed the atmosphere of the forest floor. Its feathers were dark and heavy, absorbing sunlight as it moved beneath the canopy. Its head rose high above the undergrowth, ending in a massive beak shaped like a polished wedge of bone. This beak carried immense force, able to crack through dense material with a single bite. Gastornis lived in forests that were warm, humid, and filled with life. Its steps left wide impressions in the soft soil. Its feathers brushed against low branches as it walked. It moved with deliberate calm, each foot placed carefully, as if it knew that nothing in the forest posed a true threat to it. The giant herbivores were too large to worry about. Most predators were too small. Mammals had not yet grown into the large, decisive hunters they would eventually become. And so, for a time, birds held the silence and strength that shaped the food webs of entire regions. Gastornis was not the only giant bird of the early Cenozoic. Across the world, similar creatures emerged in response to the open roles left behind by vanished reptiles. In South America, ancient landscapes supported massive ground birds that grew tall enough to rival the height of young trees. Their legs became instruments of strength and speed. Their beaks evolved into tools that could deliver crushing blows. Their bodies balanced agility and weight, allowing them to navigate through forests with surprising precision. These birds stepped into the ecological spaces once dominated by predatory reptiles. Their rise was not accidental. With the dinosaurs gone, and with mammals still small and cautious, the path to becoming a top predator was wide open. Birds had several natural advantages. Their ancestors had already mastered balance, coordination, and strong vision. Their hollow bones made them light for their size. Their feathers provided insulation in both warm and cool climates. And their beaks offered a versatile tool that could adapt quickly to new diets. Some giant birds were likely omnivores. Fossil evidence suggests that certain species fed on seeds, fruits, or roots when opportunities allowed. Yet their beaks also carried the strength needed to capture and kill small to medium-sized animals. The flexibility of their diet offered a stable foundation in a world where climates shifted and plants evolved rapidly. It allowed these birds to thrive, while mammals continued to explore the boundaries of carnivory. Gastornis, in particular, remains a subject of quiet scientific debate. Its beak was powerful enough to crush bone, but its body was shaped more for patience than pursuit. Many researchers believe it lived as an ambush hunter. It may have waded along shaded forest paths, still as a fallen branch, until a small herbivore wandered close. With a sudden lunge of its long legs, it could close the distance in a heartbeat. A single bite might have been enough to subdue its prey. The structure of its feet supports this idea. Strong claws offered stability rather than speed, ideal for holding prey against the ground while it fed. Its neck muscles were thick, capable of delivering strong downward strikes. Even its eyes sat in a position that suggests a predator's focus, able to track movement with clarity through shifting leaves. In South America, other giant birds followed similar strategies. Some relied on bursts of speed, sending shock waves through tall grasses as they rushed toward startled prey. Others crept through wooded areas with the silent precision of seasoned stalkers. Their dominance reshaped ecosystems, guiding the evolution of early mammals that shared their territory. Small herbivores developed quicker reflexes. Some learned to stay close to thick vegetation where a large bird could not easily maneuver. Others began to live more nocturnally, avoiding daylight when birds were most active. For tens of thousands of years, giant birds held their place as the primary hunters in many regions. Their shadows crossed open clearings. Their calls echoed through humid forests. Their presence influenced every creature that walked or grazed nearby. Over time, mammals would grow larger, faster, and more complex in their hunting strategies. Eventually, they would reclaim the role of land apex predators. But during this early chapter of the Cenozoic, while evolution felt its way through new shapes and possibilities, the world briefly belonged to the birds. Their reign was not loud or violent. It unfolded in steady steps across warm earth, in the weight of a heavy beak, in the quiet rhythm of feathered bodies moving through ancient forests lit by soft Eocene light. Along the warm Eocene coastlines, where the air drifted with the scent of salt and wildflowers, a quiet giant moved between the boundaries of land and sea. Soft waves rolled across ancient shores, leaving patterns in the sand that shimmered beneath sunlight. Wind carried seeds over long stretches of grassland that reached toward distant hills. In these open spaces, life had grown large and confident. Herbivores grazed along riverbanks, predators watched from thickets, and the world carried the gentle hum of an age shaped by warmth. Yet among all the creatures that walked these plains, none carried a presence quite like Andrewsarchus. Its existence entered our understanding through a single remarkable discovery: a skull nearly 1 meter long, unearthed in the dry lands of Mongolia. This skull, stretched and powerful, held jaws built for force and teeth shaped in ways that hinted at a life both opportunistic and strong. Its size alone told a story. Andrewsarchus was not simply a predator. It belonged to a lineage that experimented with body plans larger than anything seen among mammals before or since. Although only fragments of its skeleton have been found, the proportions suggested by its head reveal a creature that could have rivaled the size of the largest carnivores of later ages. In the Eocene landscape, Andrewsarchus likely stood tall on sturdy limbs, moving with slow assurance across coastal plains where sea breezes cooled the warm air. Its body may have carried some of the features common to early hoofed mammals, for it came from a group distantly related to modern hippos and whales. Yet its skull held the unmistakable signature of a powerful hunter or scavenger. Broad cheekbones supported strong jaw muscles. Its long snout, fitted with large and varied teeth, allowed it to tear, crush, and grind with equal ability. The world it lived in was rich with opportunity. Coastal ecosystems offered a blend of resources unmatched in many inland habitats. Tides left behind stranded fish and marine mammals. River mouths deposited large amounts of plant matter, attracting herbivores that grazed near the water. Inland plains held smaller mammals and reptiles. Carcasses washed ashore after storms or currents shifted. Andrewsarchus could have moved between these environments with ease. Its size gave it dominance without the need for constant confrontation. Few animals would challenge a creature with a skull as large as a grown person's torso. Even large herbivores would have stepped aside if it approached. The open land provided room for its long strides, and the coast offered nourishment in many forms. The combination made the animal a powerful and flexible presence in its environment. Because only the skull remains, the details of Andrewsarchus's behavior are shaped by careful interpretation rather than certainty. Some scientists propose that it was primarily a scavenger, using its strong jaws to crush bones and extract rich marrow from the remains of dead animals. The shape of its teeth supports this idea, with some built for slicing and others suited for grinding. This mix would have allowed it to process a wide range of foods, from flesh to plant material, depending on what the landscape offered. Others imagine Andrewsarchus as an active predator, capable of pursuing medium-sized herbivores across open plains. Its powerful jaws could have delivered decisive bites. Its long skull, filled with strong nasal passages, may have provided a keen sense of smell, helping it track prey over long distances or locate carcasses hidden by vegetation or sand. Even if it did not rely solely on the hunt, it had the strength to take down animals when opportunity aligned. There is also the possibility that Andrewsarchus lived much of its life near water. The coastlines of the Eocene were busy places, filled with birds, fish, amphibians, and early marine mammals. An animal able to feed on both land and shore would have benefited from a more stable food supply. It could have searched tidal flats for stranded animals, dragged prey from shallow water, or followed river edges where herbivores gathered to drink. The shape of its skull suggests that it could generate impressive bite force, enough to crack shells or break apart the tough bones of large mammals. This strength would have allowed it to reach nutrient-rich parts of carcasses that smaller predators could not access. In that sense, Andrewsarchus may have played a critical ecological role, recycling energy stored in the remains of animals that roamed the Eocene world. As the warm winds swept across Asia's ancient plains, Andrewsarchus walked with a steady confidence, shaped by a landscape that encouraged size, versatility, and exploration. It stood at the crossroads of evolutionary possibility, balanced between the behaviors of predator, scavenger, and coastal forager. Though its bones remained scarce, the imprint it left on its world was unmistakable. In the long story of mammal evolution, Andrewsarchus rose as one of the great giants of its time, carrying the quiet strength of an age where life reached outward in bold, sweeping forms. In the warm forests of the Middle Eocene, where sunlight drifted softly through layered canopies and tall trees shaped the rhythm of each day, a peculiar family of mammals began to wander through the shadows. Their presence felt ancient yet gentle, as if they had stepped out of a dream the earth had once imagined and kept safely tucked away. These were the Chalicotheres, creatures whose bodies blended shapes that seemed impossible together, forming silhouettes unlike anything else that moved across the land. From a distance, a Chalicothere might have looked almost familiar. Its torso carried the quiet sturdiness of a horse, broad-chested and deep-bodied. Yet its posture told another story. Instead of standing tall on straight limbs, it leaned forward in a way that recalled the stance of a modern gorilla. Its long forelimbs, thick and powerful, supported much of its weight. Its hind legs, bent slightly beneath its body, gave it a gentle, rolling gait that looked slow but steady. When it moved, it did so with a rhythmic sway, stepping carefully over roots and fallen branches, as if mindful of every shift in the ground. The most striking part of the Chalicothere was its hands. From each forelimb extended enormous claws that curved downward like long ivory crescents. At first glance, they looked suited for tearing or defense, the kind of tools that would make a predator fearsome. But these claws held a different purpose. Chalicotheres were not hunters. They were peaceful browsers, using their powerful arms to pull down branches heavy with leaves. When they found a tree with tender growth near its crown, they braced their weight, reached upward, and hooked a branch with their claws. With slow, even strength, they drew the greenery toward their mouths and fed with gentle patience. Their claws, despite their size, required care. Chalicotheres often walked on the knuckles of their forelimbs, keeping the curved tips safely elevated so they would not dull or crack. This gave them a slightly forward leaning stance that made their movements graceful in an unusual, deliberate way. They became part of the forest's rhythm, sharing space with early primates, oversized herbivores, and the predators that tracked the edges of woodland paths. Some species of Chalicothere lived in wetter regions, where the soil was soft and the air carried the scent of damp leaves. Others roamed woodlands and open forests, where sunlight filtered through in pale gold sheets. Fossils suggest that their range stretched across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America over millions of years. In each region, they adapted to the local vegetation, selecting leaves, fruits, and young shoots with the care of animals shaped entirely by the forest's generosity. Their slow lifestyle made them appear calm, even contemplative. They did not rely on speed. They did not chase or flee with frantic energy. Instead, they trusted their size, their strength, and the dense cover of the forests around them. Few predators would risk attacking a creature so large, especially one that could deliver powerful defensive blows if threatened. Yet these soft movements were rarely used for anything other than balance and browsing. Because of their height and long forelimbs, chalicotheres could reach vegetation other herbivores could not easily access. Their feeding habits may have shaped the growth patterns of forests, encouraging plants to evolve new shoots or different leaf arrangements. In this way, they participated in the quiet conversation between life and land, a conversation that had guided evolution since the first leaves unfurled millions of years earlier. The world they inhabited was filled with competition and change, yet the Chalicotheres responded with gentleness rather than aggression. Their bodies looked fierce to the unfamiliar eye, but their hearts belonged to the stillness of the forest. Their claws, which seemed monstrous at first, were tools of nourishment and balance. Their posture, which gave them an almost hulking appearance, allowed them to reach the canopy with ease. Even their slow pace suited them perfectly, helping them conserve energy in a warm world rich with food. As the ages passed and climates shifted, many Chalicothere species adapted to new environments, reshaping their limbs and bodies as forests thinned or temperatures cooled. Yet they always carried the same quiet dignity. They were among the few large herbivores that did not rely on running, thick armor, or massive horns. Their strength rested in stillness and patience. They moved as if time itself flowed around them a little more slowly. By the time their lineage eventually faded from the world, they had left behind a legacy written in the delicate marks of their claws, the wear of their teeth, and the faint impressions of their knuckle-walking steps. Their lives showed that even in an age filled with giants, not all power needed to be loud. Some of it could be carried in the gentlest reach of a long limb pulling down a branch, in the soft sound of leaves being gathered, and in the steady rhythm of a creature that lived peacefully beneath the warm, ancient trees. In the heart of the ancient Eocene world, where warm winds drifted across Africa and rivers wound through low, lush forests, a creature moved with the quiet certainty of something built for an age of abundance. The land that would one day be Egypt was not a place of desert or shifting dunes. It was a realm of water and trees, a broad swamp forest where palms, ferns, and flowering plants rose above still ponds that reflected the soft green light of the canopy. In these slow and shadowed wetlands lived an animal whose appearance seemed carved from the shapes of mountains and the patience of ancient earth. This was Arsinoitherium. At first glance, Arsinoitherium might remind one of a rhinoceros, with its heavy body, thick limbs, and deep, resonant footsteps. Yet, it shared no close ancestry with rhinos or with any modern hoofed mammal. It belonged to a lineage long vanished, a branch of evolution that rose quietly and disappeared just as quietly, leaving behind bones that tell a story unlike any other. It carried the familiar strength of a large herbivore, but wrapped in a form that was both strange and unforgettable. Its most striking feature was the pair of immense horns that rose from its skull. They did not resemble the sharp, pointed horns of later herbivores. Instead, they were massive structures, long and thick, shaped more like upturned peaks of stone. From the base near its eyes, the horns swept forward and upward, forming twin projections large enough to dominate the entire front of its head. Smaller horn-like bumps sat behind them, giving the skull a layered architectural profile. The horns were not made of keratin like those of modern rhinos. They were extensions of bone, fused directly to the skull itself, making them both solid and surprisingly delicate in texture. These horns spark long discussions among paleontologists, for their true purpose remains a gentle mystery. Some imagine them used in displays, with individuals standing tall in swampy clearings, angling their horns to show size and strength. The horns may have caught the warm Eocene light as they moved, sending reflections across still pools. Others believe the horns played a role in mating rituals, where males may have lifted or pressed them together in slow, controlled motions, testing weight and balance rather than clashing with force. The structure of the horns suggests that violent combat would have been risky, perhaps even harmful, so the animals likely relied on posture, presence, and careful displays instead. Still, the horns may have offered protection. They could have deterred predators that roamed the forests or waded along the riverbanks. Even a young Arsinoitherium carried a silhouette that demanded caution. The size alone, combined with those towering horns, created an impression of immovable strength. Yet everything in its bones and in the shape of its limbs suggests a creature more peaceful than intimidating, one that depended on its environment rather than aggression for survival. Life in the swamp forests shaped every part of this remarkable beast. The ground beneath its feet was soft and saturated, cushioned with layers of fallen leaves and plant debris. Arsinoitherium's broad, rounded feet helped distribute its weight, allowing it to move through mud without sinking deeply. It traveled in small herds, stepping carefully between the roots of palm trees and along river edges lined with reeds. Its body was tall and wide, able to push through dense vegetation where smaller animals struggled to pass. Feeding would have been a slow, steady process. The animal used its strong jaws to gather leaves and soft plant material from low branches. It may have waded into shallow water to reach aquatic plants growing near the surface. The swamp forests offered abundant food, renewed each season by warm rains and river floods. In such a world, Arsinoitherium did not need to rush. Its life followed the gentle rhythm of the wetlands, resting in shaded pools during the heat of the day and moving again when the air cooled. The sounds of its movement blended with the landscape, water stirring beneath heavy steps, leaves brushing against its flanks, the soft calls of birds echoing through the trees. Frogs, insects, and distant mammals added their voices to the chorus of the swamp. Arsinoitherium walked through this living world as a quiet giant, shaping its environment simply by being present. Trails widened where it passed. Plants dispersed seeds along its pathways. Pools deepened where herds gathered to drink or cool their skin. Although this lineage would eventually vanish as climates shifted and landscapes dried, its time on Earth remains one of the most vivid chapters in the early age of mammals. Arsinoitherium carried a form that seems almost mythic, Yet it lived not in fantasy, but in forests shaped by warmth, water, and the steady hum of Eocene life. In the ancient wetlands of Egypt, under the soft glow of a world still finding its balance, this creature moved through green shadows with calm certainty. Its horns rose like twin peaks above the rich vegetation. Its steps followed the rhythm of rivers and rain, and its life unfolded gracefully in a land where the air felt thick with growth, where every day drifted gently across pools that held the reflections of giants passing through. Long before northern Africa became a land of sand and shimmering heat, it breathed with a different rhythm. The region that would one day hold vast deserts was once a kingdom of water and trees, shaped by warm rains that fell throughout the year. Rivers braided across the land like veins of silver. Swamps spread outward in wide, shadowed pools. Forests rose from the wet ground in layers of emerald, each canopy resting gently on the next. This was Africa during the Middle Eocene, a time when life gathered in great abundance and the air carried the scent of rain, soil, and flowering plants. In this ancient world, sunlight filtered through broad leaves and tall palms, spreading dappled gold along the forest floor. Vines curled around towering trunks, reaching for patches of brightness in the canopy. The air remained warm even in the quiet hours before dawn, and gentle breezes drifted across the floodplains, carrying with them the voices of countless animals. The land felt alive in every direction, filled with movement and stillness woven together like threads in a soft tapestry. Along the edges of deep pools, ancient crocodiles rested in the shallow water. Some grew to impressive lengths, their scaly backs rising like worn stones just above the surface. Their eyes watched patiently from beneath the ripples, waiting for a fish to draw near or for a careless mammal to stir the reeds. Yet these crocodiles did more than hunt. They shaped the water channels by sliding through soft mud, carving paths that guided the flow of streams. Their presence helped maintain the balance of a world dependent on wetlands. Giant turtles wandered through the swamps as well, their domed shells glistening after warm rain. They grazed on water plants and soft leaves that drifted near the surface. Some turtles ventured onto land to feed on low-hanging branches. They traveled slowly, but over decades their steps etched small patterns into the forest floor. These quiet journeys helped plants spread seeds to places they might otherwise never reach. Higher in the trees, early primates lived among branches heavy with fruit. Their bodies were small and agile, adapted to leap between trunks with ease. They carried young clinging tightly to their fur and searched for berries in the dim green light. Their calls echoed lightly through the canopy, a delicate counterpoint to the deeper sounds of the swamp below. These primates thrived in the safety of height, where the forest offered both shelter and abundance. Their large eyes helped them navigate the shadows. Their hands grasped bark with confident precision, and their presence added another voice to the growing harmony of the region. On the forest floor, larger mammals moved with the careful grace of creatures shaped by centuries of gentle climate. Some were heavy-limbed browsers that fed on broad leaves and low branches. Others wandered between patches of sunlight, leaving impressions in the wet ground that filled with water after each rainfall. Their movements guided the growth of vegetation, creating narrow pathways where smaller animals could travel and patches of open space where new plants could sprout. Among these swamp giants walked animals like Arsinoitherium, the horned browsers of the Eocene wetlands. Their heavy steps stirred small waves along the riverbanks. Their horns rose above the reeds like pale ridges of stone. Although powerful in appearance, their daily lives flowed quietly within the forest's rhythm. They fed, they waited, they rested in the shade of towering trees. Their presence added to the calm strength of the swamp kingdom. This land felt eternal, Yet even during the height of its lushness, subtle signs of change had begun. Far to the south, tectonic shifts altered ocean currents. Winds slowly changed direction, carrying less moisture into the region each year. Rainfall patterns shifted in small but significant ways. What had once been constant began to vary. Pools dried a little faster during warm seasons. Certain plants struggled at the edges of their range. Grasses appeared in places once held by thick undergrowth. The transformation was slow, unfolding over countless lifetimes. No single creature would have noticed a sudden change, for each year resembled the last with gentle consistency. Yet the land itself felt the difference. Rivers thinned along some stretches, forests receded from one valley, then another. Swamps that had existed for centuries began to shrink at their fringes. Still, the Eocene world held its beauty. Even as the air grew a bit less humid, the forests remained abundant. The wetlands continued to support herds, reptiles, birds, and primates. Life adapted, shifting its patterns with the land. Animals moved toward areas where water still gathered. Plants evolved to withstand longer dry spells. The swamp kingdom persisted, though it carried early hints of a future that would reshape the entire continent. Long before the Sahara emerged, northern Africa existed as a great cradle of warmth and water, a land where ancient crocodiles shared riverbanks with gentle giants, where turtles glided through sunlit pools, and where primates danced through the canopy in soft morning light. It was a place where the earth breathed with deep, steady rhythms, holding on to its last great chapter of tropical forests before the slow winds of change began to gather and guide the region toward a distant, quieter destiny. High in the layered canopies of the Eocene forests, where sunlight drifted in soft ribbons through leaves as wide as open hands, a new kind of creature began to move with quiet certainty. These forests were immense, shaped by warmth and endless moisture. Trees stretched toward the sky in tier after tier, each layer supporting life that clung, leapt, and glided through the shadows. Beneath these towering giants, enormous herbivores shaped the ground with their heavy steps, while predators drifted through the undergrowth with careful patience. Yet above it all, tucked into the branches, early primates found their place in the world. They were small, no larger than modern squirrels, with bodies light enough to weave through vines without bending them. Their eyes, bright and forward-facing, captured even the faintest movement as the canopy swayed in the afternoon breeze. These eyes were one of their greatest adaptations. The forests were dim beneath the thick leaves, and shadows shifted constantly, but primates evolved vision suited to this world. Their eyes gathered light with remarkable efficiency, allowing them to see in textures rather than flat shapes. Depth, distance, and subtle nuance became as clear to them as the patterns of bark beneath their hands. Those hands were another gift, shaped by their environment. Unlike many mammals, early primates had flexible fingers that curled easily around branches. Their thumbs could press against their fingertips, allowing them to grasp in ways that no other mammal of the time could. This simple ability opened entire realms of the forest to them. They could cling to smooth vines, pick fruit from narrow stems, and steady themselves on branches where even a slight misstep could mean a long fall into the darkness below. Balance became their constant companion. Their long tails acted like living rudders that shifted their weight with each leap, their limbs stretched in proportions that favored climbing. When they ran along branches, they did so with the practiced certainty of animals that trusted their bodies entirely. The canopy was not a place of fear, but a woven path of opportunities that they explored from dawn until dusk. Food was abundant here. Flowers bloomed in bursts of color. Fruits ripened under the soft Eocene sun. insects hid within layers of bark. Early primates fed on whatever the forest offered, picking gently from leaves or snapping tiny insects from the edges of vines. Their diets were flexible, shifting with the seasons, and this flexibility helped them thrive where other mammals remained bound to the ground. They moved in small groups, often just families or clusters of close relatives. Soft calls passed between them, almost lost in the hum of insects and the distant calls of swamp birds. These calls helped them stay near one another as they traveled through dense foliage. The forest had dangers, but cooperation offered safety. A sharp sound from one individual could signal a predator below. A gentle trill could announce a new cluster of ripe fruit. Their social bonds became a quiet strength, allowing them to flourish together in a world that constantly changed around them. Below the canopy, the great herbivores of the Eocene shaped the landscape with their size. Creatures like brontotheres and Arsinoitherium pushed through ferns and young trees, leaving clear pathways in their wake. For small primates, these giants were companions rather than threats. Their movements stirred insects from hiding. Their feeding opened sunlight patches where new plants grew, and their bodies left behind bark scraps and broken branches rich with insects. By simply existing, these gentle giants created opportunities for the primates living above them. The primates learned the patterns of the larger animals. They knew when herds passed through certain valleys. They understood which trees would fruit after a herd fed nearby. They learned to watch the movement of leaves stirred by heavy bodies below, using it as a signal to adjust their own paths through the treetops. In return, their presence in the canopy helped spread seeds far and wide. As they fed on fruit, they carried the forest's future within them, dropping seeds from high branches where young plants could take root. In this way, early primates became part of a vast, interwoven system. Their small bodies held an agility that made the canopy feel like home. Their senses sharpened to meet the challenges of constant movement. Their social ties deepened as they learned to survive in a world filled with creatures far larger than themselves. The forest, immense and ever shifting, shaped them gently. It taught them to leap, grasp, balance, and observe. These early primates carried the first quiet hints of a lineage that would one day explore the world in ways no other mammal could imagine. But here, in the soft green light of the Eocene, they were simply small creatures, moving gracefully through giant forests, guided by instinct, shaped by branches, and cradled by the tall trees that sheltered their every step. In the deep warmth of the Paleocene world, long before true jungles rose and before mammals took their first confident steps into the Eocene, the rivers of South America carried a stillness that hid something immense. These rivers wound through lowland forests thick with ferns and towering palms, their waters dark with tannins and rich with drifting leaves. Warm rains fed them, sunlight warmed them, and the air hung heavy with moisture. This warm, steady climate created a cradle where ancient reptiles could grow to extraordinary sizes. And within these broad, slow-moving waters lived a creature whose presence shaped everything around it. This was Titanoboa, a snake so long that it seemed to flow like a living riverbank. It measured over 10 meters from head to tail, its body as thick as a young tree trunk, patterned with muted shades that blended into mud and shadows. Titanoboa glided through water with the smoothness of a drifting log, barely disturbing the surface. Its muscles rippled beneath its scales, each movement guided by the steady rhythm of the river's current. When it breathed, the water near its nostrils trembled in soft waves. Titanoboa thrived because the Paleocene world was warm in a way modern Earth rarely experiences. For reptiles, warmth is life. It fuels their growth, sharpens their senses, and expands their possibilities. The global temperature during this era hovered at levels high enough to make lush forests stretch across entire continents. The air felt thick with humidity, the soil held warmth deep within it, and the rivers reflected a heat that allowed cold-blooded giants to flourish. In such a climate, Titanoboa became the ruler of the waterways. It hunted in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Large turtles basked along the riverbanks. Early crocodile relatives dozed in the shade, trusting their size to keep danger at bay. But Titanoboa did not need speed or teeth shaped for tearing. It used the weight of its coils, the strength of a body built by the river itself. When prey ventured too close, the snake moved with slow precision, a flicker beneath the surface, a sudden surge. In an instant, powerful loops of muscle wrapped around the body of its target. Titanoboa did not crush bones violently. It squeezed with patient force, tightening until the heart of its prey could no longer beat. The struggle ended quietly, swallowed by the soft murmur of the flowing water. Mammals living near these rivers learned to survive in a world where such giants existed. They were small, often no larger than modern raccoons or house cats, and they moved with a careful awareness shaped by generations of quiet observation. They kept to the trees when possible, climbing into branches that overhung the river but never dipping too low. When they descended to drink, they approached cautiously, testing leaves and pebbles with delicate steps. Their ears caught the faintest rustle, their eyes tracked the shadows beneath the water's surface. Some mammals adapted by becoming more nocturnal, using the cool of night as protection against large reptiles that preferred the heat of day. Others evolved quicker reflexes, sharp senses, and more elaborate alarm calls. Communities formed loose groups where individuals watched for threats together. Even their diets and foraging habits changed. Many stayed farther from the riverbanks, relying on fruits, insects, and leaves deeper within the forest. In this way, Titanoboa shaped early mammal evolution, not by hunting them regularly, for the river giant focused more on turtles, crocodiles, and large aquatic prey, but by existing as a looming presence. Its size reminded every animal near the water of the power held by the ancient reptilian world. Mammals learned caution, they learned awareness, they learned to climb, leap, and communicate in ways that supported survival in a landscape where danger hid beneath still water. The river systems themselves bore the influence of Titanoboa's reign. Its weight carved smooth channels along the muddy bottom. Trails of disturbed sediment marked where the great snake had passed. It contributed to the delicate balance of predator and prey that maintained the health of wetlands. Every turtle nest defended, every crocodile displaced, every ripple in the river told a quiet story of how a single giant could shape an entire ecosystem. The warm climate that allowed Titanoboa to grow so immense also nurtured early mammals, plants, insects, and amphibians. Yet it was the snake's dominance that reminded the world that the echoes of the reptilian past had not yet faded. This was an era of coexistence, where ancient forces brushed shoulders with rising ones. The mammal world was small, agile, and full of potential, but it was not yet the ruling force of Earth. Here, in the Paleocene swamps, the old giants still held sway, and as the rivers flowed between their forested banks, Titanoboa glided through them like a memory stretched across the water, a reminder that evolution's path is never straightforward. It returns, circles, and lingers, leaving marks on every creature that shares its world. As the Eocene world continued to warm and breathe with vibrant life, the shapes of the continents guided the stories of countless species. Nothing on Earth was still. The crust beneath the oceans shifted slowly, carrying entire land masses with it. Mountain chains rose grain by grain. Seas deepened or grew shallow over great stretches of time. And in these quiet movements, new pathways opened between continents, only to vanish again beneath rising waters. These paths were the land bridges, soft stepping stones that linked worlds which had once been far apart. In the northern regions of the planet, where cool breezes mingled with gentle sunlight, Asia, Europe, and North America were positioned close enough that shifting sea levels sometimes revealed long corridors of Earth. These corridors were not dramatic landscapes. They appeared as rolling plains, forested belts, or wide stretches of shrub-filled land. They formed slowly as waters withdrew, and just as slowly disappeared when seas rose again. But for the mammals moving across the continents, these changes opened opportunities that reshaped their lives. In Asia, forests stretched across wide valleys and plateaus. Herds of early hoofed mammals moved among them, grazing from low shrubs and browsing the leaves of young trees. Predators tracked their paths, leaving soft impressions in the soil that vanished under the next rainfall. When a land bridge connected Asia to North America through the ancient region of Beringia, these animals smelled new winds drifting from distant lands. Forests on the other side held unfamiliar scents, leaves with slightly different oils, soils shaped by other climates. Step by step, some groups followed these new trails. The journey was not a sudden migration. It unfolded slowly as generations pushed a little farther along the corridor. Each century, herds expanded, browsing across wider ranges. Predators followed, drawn by instinct and opportunity. Smaller mammals moved along the paths as well, exploring new habitats, tasting fruits unknown to their ancestors, and learning the rhythms of different landscapes. The land bridge acted as a gentle invitation, allowing species to wander into territories that once felt unreachable. Europe, too, played its part in this story. Once a scattered archipelago, it shifted into a more unified land as sea levels fluctuated. Mammals from Asia crossed into these woodlands, discovering forests filled with tall flowering trees and rolling slopes covered with ferns. From Europe, some species continued westward, reaching North America when the continents aligned just right. Others remained in the old-growth forests of Europe, where isolation shaped them into new forms. Every time animals crossed into a new region, evolution responded. Fresh plant life offered different nutrients. New predators challenged old strategies. Weather patterns varied, shaping coats, body sizes, and behaviors. Some mammals grew larger to cope with colder winds. Others became more agile to navigate thicker forests. Some species spread widely, their range extending across entire continents. Others remained in small pockets, adapting so specifically to their surroundings that they became distinct branches on the tree of life. Predators experienced these changes as well. When new herbivores arrived in North America from Asia, existing predators had to adjust. Some developed sharper senses or stronger limbs to chase unfamiliar prey. Others shifted their diets, hunting smaller or quicker animals. Omnivores thrived, using their flexible diets to explore landscapes new to their ancestors. In this way, migration did not simply move animals, it stirred ecosystems, sending ripples of adaptation through every corner of the continent. These journeys shaped the early primates, small hoofed mammals, ancient carnivores, and the many insect eaters that fluttered through leaf litter in search of food. Each species brought its own fragments of behavior, instinct, and physical traits into new environments where climate and competition encouraged them to grow into something different. The world became a tapestry woven from these countless crossings. Every land bridge created a mixing of lineages. Every disappearance of a land bridge isolated those lineages once again, giving them space to diverge. In North America, the arrival of Asian mammals helped shape new communities. Open woodlands welcomed herds that grazed in loose groups. Forests deepened as browsing species helped distribute seeds across wide regions. Predators refined their strength and stealth. Scavengers expanded their ranges. The landscape itself shifted under these influences, becoming part of a larger, interconnected world shaped by the slow steps of travelers. Southward migrations added to this story as well. As climate zones shifted, some mammals followed rivers toward warmer regions. Others climbed mountain slopes, adjusting to thinner air and colder nights. Each movement reshaped the patterns of life, carrying ancient lineages into new chapters of their evolution. In time, the land bridges would sink beneath rising seas again. When they vanished, the continents parted ways. The mammals trapped on each side continued evolving separately, shaped by their own landscapes and climates. What had once been shared became unique. What had once been one population became many. But the memory of the great migrations remained coded in their bones and carried through their descendants. It lived in the shapes of their limbs, the patterns of their teeth, the instincts that guided them through forests and plains. The world they built was richer because they walked across continents when the earth briefly allowed it. And long after the land bridges disappeared, the imprint of those journeys remained, held gently in the deep story of life on a restless and ever-changing planet. In the warm brightness of the early Eocene, when forests still wrapped much of the world in deep green and rivers traced gentle curves through open woodlands, one of the strangest mammals ever to walk the earth emerged onto the landscape. It moved with the weight and certainty of a creature that had grown large in a world filled with opportunity. Its outline rose above tall grasses and young trees. Its footsteps pressed softly into damp soil, and on its wide, heavy skull, a set of features appeared that seemed to belong to some ancient dream rather than a familiar herbivore. This was Uintatherium. Uintatherium was enormous, as large as a modern rhinoceros, with a barrel-shaped body and thick legs that carried its bulk through forests and floodplains. But it was the head that captured every glance. Its skull, long and deep, carried paired bony knobs that rose along the top like small rounded towers. These knobs, sometimes 6 in number, gave it a crowned appearance, though they were not horns in the traditional sense. They were extensions of bone, shaped by forces in its lineage that scientists still study with quiet curiosity. Yet even these strange structures were not the most surprising feature. From the upper jaw hung long, curved saber-like canine teeth. They extended several inches downward, sharp and imposing, more reminiscent of a predator than a gentle plant eater. Their presence puzzled early researchers and continues to stir fascination today. Uintatherium had a mouth filled with grinding teeth designed for vegetation, yet it carried fangs that seemed suited for tearing flesh. In life, the contrast must have been striking. Imagine this peaceful herbivore lowering its broad head to drink from a river, its sabers casting shadows on the water. Or picture it moving through soft undergrowth, the curved teeth catching the glint of filtered sunlight. The fangs were likely sheathed in soft tissue and rarely seen fully, but their existence hinted at pressures shaping early herbivores in ways that differed greatly from modern times. What purpose did these great canines serve? Scientists have offered several ideas, each one shaped by the clues left in bone. Some believe the sabers played a role in display. Perhaps males showed their fangs as part of courtship rituals, lifting their heads to reveal strength and maturity. The shape and size of the canines differed slightly between individuals, suggesting that natural selection might have favored visual signals as much as physical ability. Others imagine the canines used in dominance contests among members of the same species, not for fierce, bone shattering combat, but for controlled pushing and positioning. The fangs may have helped anchor one animal's head against another, guiding the pressure of their skulls as they tested one another in slow, ritualized displays of strength. The heavy knobs along the skull may have absorbed the weight of these interactions, acting like built-in shields that protected sensitive regions beneath. There is also the possibility that the fangs served as a deterrent against predators. Early carnivores of the Eocene were growing bolder, shaped by forested environments where ambush and pursuit took new forms. A herbivore armed with long canines would not have been easy to approach. Even if Uintatherium rarely used its teeth in combat, the mere sight of them may have been enough to discourage attacks. Defense in the natural world often relies as much on appearance as on physical action. The skull of Uintatherium holds other mysteries. Its nasal region, deep and broad, suggests that soft tissue once covered the upper part of its snout. Some researchers propose that it carried a thickened pad, or perhaps a gentle swelling of skin, giving it a distinctive face very different from modern large herbivores. If this is true, then Uintatherium may have communicated through sounds or scents shaped by this soft tissue, adding another layer to the social world it inhabited. The existence of such a creature reveals much about the early evolution of herbivores. In a world where mammals were still learning how to fill niches left by the dinosaurs, many lineages experimented with form. Size offered safety, strength offered security, but form alone was not enough. Visual signals, facial structures, and unusual weapons or displays may have been critical as herbivores navigated new ecosystems filled with emerging predators and shifting landscapes. Uintatherium lived in herds, traveling through open forests where water and vegetation remained abundant. Their movements shaped the land, their feeding created clearings where new plants could grow, and their dominance stood as a quiet reminder that evolution in this age was bold, creative, and unconstrained by modern patterns. Their strange, towering skulls and gentle bodies blended into one of the most unusual combinations ever seen in mammalian history. Over time, as climates cooled and ecosystems changed, Uintatherium and its relatives faded from the world. But their bones, lifted from ancient stone, still speak softly of a time when Earth experimented freely, testing shapes and strategies that would appear only once in all of life's long story. In the deep past, beneath the warm Eocene sun, Uintatherium moved through forests with a mixture of strength and gentleness, carrying the surprising beauty of a lineage that walked a path unlike any other. Across the broad expanse of early and middle Eocene North America, long before the continent held sweeping grasslands or towering mountains shaped by later ages, a different world unfolded. Warm winds drifted over wide valleys and open forests. River channels curved gently through soft soil. The air shimmered with heat during long summers, and even winters carried a mildness that allowed forests to stretch from horizon to horizon. In this gentle but ever-changing land, giants began to rise, each shaped by the vegetation beneath their feet and the pressures of a growing and shifting ecosystem. One of the most striking giants was the brontothere. These immense herbivores, relatives of horses and tapirs, moved across open woodlands with slow and powerful steps. Their bodies were heavy and barrel-shaped, built to support tremendous weight. Their limbs were strong and columnar, lifting them high above low shrubs and tangled undergrowth. At the front of their skulls rose forked horn structures, shaped from bone and covered in thick skin. Males carried the largest horns, using them in displays and slow pushing contests that helped establish dominance within their herds. These horns were not weapons of violence, they were symbols of presence, shaped by a world where size and strength meant stability. Nearby lived the Entelodonts, creatures whose very appearance could unsettle any observer, sometimes called hell pigs. Though they were neither pigs nor demons of any kind, they carried massive heads perched on muscular necks. Their jaws were wide and heavily built, able to crack bone as easily as they could shear flesh. Their bodies stood tall, supported by long limbs that allowed them to trot across great distances with surprising speed. Entelodonts were not strict predators. They fed on whatever the land offered, shifting between scavenging, hunting smaller animals, and foraging for plants. Their presence added tension to the landscape, for their size and force made them both competitors and threats to many species. Smaller, more delicate forms ran between these giants. Early horses, no larger than small dogs, moved through the shaded forest floors in nimble leaps. Their toes spread against the soil, giving them balance as they darted between roots and fallen branches. They browsed on tender leaves and fruit, their small size allowing them to reach into dense thickets where larger herbivores struggled to follow. Over time, the changing vegetation encouraged them to grow slightly taller and lighter, preparing them for worlds that had not yet formed. Early camels also appeared on this continent, long before they developed the distinct humps seen in modern species. These early forms were graceful, slender, and surprisingly quick. Their limbs stretched longer than those of early horses, allowing them to travel over open woodland and patchy clearings with efficient strides. They browsed higher from branches and nibbled leaves on shrubs that carpeted the landscape. Their growing agility offered an advantage in a world where predators were evolving their own strategies in response to the abundance of herbivore life. The vegetation of North America played a quiet but profound role in shaping these creatures. Forests of tall trees with broad leaves filtered sunlight into gentle patterns on the ground. Beneath the canopy, layers of shrubs and flowering plants formed dense networks of food. In open spaces between forests, young trees and bushes grew in clusters, creating pockets of browse for animals of varying sizes. Herbivores adapted their bodies to these landscapes. Heavy brontotheres evolved broad teeth for grinding tough vegetation. Early horses refined their agility to reach tender leaves hidden within dense growth. Early camels grew taller and more selective in their feeding habits. The competition among predators and scavengers sharpened the edges of this dynamic world. Large carnivores stalked herds from the cover of forests, watching for weakness or distraction. Smaller predators hunted in groups, weaving through the undergrowth with coordinated silence. Entelodonts roamed widely, stealing kills when they could, or chasing off rivals with deep growls and powerful displays. The balance between hunters and herbivores created a constant push and pull. Every step, every shift in vegetation influenced how each species adapted and survived. Scavengers played their part as well. Birds with keen eyes circled overhead, watching the movements of herds and predators alike. When a carcass lay unguarded, they descended swiftly, their shadows flickering across the ground like drifting leaves. Small mammals, too, gathered what they could, carrying scraps into burrows or hollow logs. Nothing went unused. Life in this age flowed in cycles of growth, consumption, and renewal. The giants of North America moved through this world with calm certainty, shaped by the land and shaping it in return. Brontotheres carved open spaces through their browsing. Entelodonts pressed paths into the soil as they traveled long distances in search of food. Early horses and camels scattered seeds with each step, helping forests spread into new areas. And though this world would change over the millions of years that followed, its patterns left lasting impressions. The shapes of these animals, their behaviors, and their responses to climate and vegetation became early chapters in the long story of mammalian life. In the warm Eocene glow, under trees that swayed gently in rising winds, the lost giants of North America walked through landscapes that carried both the memory of ancient times and the promise of worlds still waiting to form. During long stretches of the Eocene, Europe did not resemble the broad, continuous landmass we know today. Instead, it existed as a scattered chain of islands rising from warm, shallow seas. Each island held its own forests, rivers, and quiet stretches of open woodland. Between them lay clear blue water that glimmered beneath soft sunlight. These islands formed a world of separation and gentle boundaries, a place where life could not easily travel from one shore to the next. In this patchwork landscape, evolution moved in unusual directions, exploring forms that seemed to bend the rules that guided life elsewhere. The islands varied in size. Some were large, covered in deep forests rich with ferns and flowering plants. Others were narrow strips of land with steep cliffs that rose sharply from the sea. A few were little more than ridges of rock wrapped in vegetation, yet each of them offered enough water, shelter, and food to support entire ecosystems. Animals that reached these islands often arrived by chance. They floated on storm-tossed vegetation, swam across narrow channels, or walked along temporary land bridges that appeared when sea levels shifted slightly. Once they reached an island, they often remained there for generations, shaped by conditions very different from the continental worlds they had known. Isolation has a quiet, powerful influence on evolution. On these islands, predators were often absent or far fewer than on larger continents. Without the pressure of constant danger, some species grew smaller, others grew larger. Body size drifted according to the island's needs rather than the wider world's. Food supply, competition, and available space all nudged species down new paths. On some islands, small herbivores shrank slowly over generations. Limited vegetation meant that smaller bodies required less food. These dwarf forms moved lightly through the underbrush, feeding on tender shoots and fallen fruit. Their bones reveal limbs more delicate than their mainland ancestors, shaped by a life that required careful balance and minimal energy. They fit their landscapes as precisely as seeds fit their shells. Other islands produced the opposite outcome. Without large predators, certain species grew steadily larger, expanding into ecological roles left empty by ancient extinctions. Some became the island's dominant browsers, reaching higher leaves or digging deeper into soft soil. Their size protected them from smaller threats. They wandered across the land with slow and steady steps, their presence reshaping vegetation patterns and guiding plant growth. These gentle giants rose from lineages that were modest in size elsewhere in the world, yet here they discovered a new evolutionary canvas. Predators on these islands evolved in unusual ways as well. Some became smaller, their bodies adapting to scarce prey. Others grew lean and swift, making the most of limited opportunities. A few evolved shapes that seem strange today, carrying proportions that appear exaggerated or whimsical. In isolation, evolution no longer marched toward familiar patterns. It drifted, responded, and tested ideas that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Early primates lived on many of these islands too, their small hands grasping branches that hung above quiet forest floors. With fewer predators, they moved with calm curiosity, exploring the canopy with greater freedom. Their diets broadened, their movements softened, and their social structures shifted to match the peaceful rhythms of their island homes. The bones they left behind show variations unseen in their mainland relatives, subtle differences in limb proportions and jaw shapes that reflect diets shaped by island plants. The seas that separated these islands acted both as barriers and as guardians. Storms swept across the channels, and warm breezes carried the scent of salt deep into the forests. Yet few animals crossed these waters, and those that did found themselves stepping into a world where familiar strategies no longer applied. They had to adjust. They had to learn. They had to find their place in ecosystems where every species, large or small, was shaped by the quiet force of isolation. Plants followed similar paths. Some grew shorter, adapting to soil that held fewer nutrients. Others spread across open spaces with unusual shapes or flowering patterns. Pollinators, shaped by island life as well, influenced these changes through their own evolving needs. Forests on these islands looked familiar yet different, filled with life sculpted by a slow and steady hand. What happened in Europe's island worlds is part of a broader theme in Earth's history. In places where species become trapped or gently confined, evolution often moves toward extremes. Without competing pressures, life explores possibilities that remain hidden elsewhere. Body size swings to either end of the scale, behaviors shift, physical traits stretch into shapes that appear almost experimental. The result is a kind of quiet creativity, written across bones and landscapes that existed only for a brief moment in time. As sea levels continued to rise and fall, some islands merged, others disappeared beneath the waves. Ecosystems blended, shifted, and settled into new forms. Many of the island species vanished when the barriers dissolved or when new competitors arrived from larger continents. Yet their traces remain in the fossil record, offering a gentle glimpse into worlds where nature played with ideas that would never return again. In the soft light of the Eocene, Europe's islands breathed with life that grew in unexpected directions. Dwarf herbivores rustled through low vegetation, giant browsers wandered beneath tall trees. Predators refined their shapes to match the delicate balance of their ecosystems. And together, these creatures created a chapter of Earth's history filled with quiet beauty, shaped by the slow, persistent influence of isolation and time. In the warm stretch of the late Eocene and early Oligocene, long before the first big cats stalked grasslands or forests, another lineage of predators held the highest places in the food chain. They were the Hyenodonts, a group of carnivorous mammals whose bodies carried a quiet, ancient strength. Their bones, uncovered from rock layers across Africa and Asia, tell a story of creatures built for a world that pulsed with new forms of life and shifting landscapes. These early predators ruled with a presence both graceful and fearsome, shaped by a design unlike anything alive today. A hyenodont stood tall on long, straight limbs, built more for enduring movement than sudden bursts of speed. Some species were lean and wolf-sized. Others were enormous, with shoulders that rose above a grown human's waist. Their skulls stretched forward in long, narrow shapes that gave them an almost reptilian profile. Large eye sockets sat high on their heads, offering wide fields of vision that let them track prey even in tangled forests or across open plains. Their teeth told the clearest part of their story. While modern carnivores rely on a pair of specialized teeth that slice like scissors, hyenodonts had long rows of blades that stretched along the jaw. Each tooth worked with the next to cut flesh in smooth, continuous motions. Their jaws moved differently as well. Instead of powerful up and down crushing bites like modern big cats, the hyenodont jaw followed a more sweeping motion. The teeth slid past each other with precision, turning meat into soft strips with calm efficiency. This difference meant they fed differently, hunted differently, and shaped ecosystems in their own unique way. Their skulls hint at immense muscle attachments that allowed steady pressure over long periods. They could hold on to struggling prey with patience, tightening their grip until the hunt ended quietly. Across Africa and Asia, hyenodonts moved through many environments. In dense forests, they walked between towering trunks with the confidence of predators who understood every shadow. Their steps were measured, their senses tuned to the soft movements of small mammals or the shifting weight of larger herbivores browsing nearby. In more open woodlands, they trotted with endurance, following trails left by herds or tracking the faint scent of animals weakened by age or injury. Some species adapted to life near rivers, feeding on animals that lingered along the water's edge. Their long jaws, sharp teeth, and patient hunting style allowed them to take advantage of prey that modern predators might ignore. Their dominance came not from a single advantage, but from a combination of traits shaped by millions of years of evolution. They had strong jaws capable of long feeding sessions. They had long limbs that carried them across large territories. Their senses, although different from those of modern carnivores, matched the landscapes they inhabited. They lived in a world where early elephants, ancient rhinos, giant birds, and strange herbivores wandered through forests and valleys. The hyenodonts learned the patterns of these animals. They followed migrations. They patrolled the edges of herds. They watched from shaded cover until opportunity revealed itself. Some of the largest hyenodonts reached weights comparable to modern big cats, while others grew far beyond that. One known giant, sometimes called a bone crusher of the ancient world, had a skull nearly a meter long. Its presence would have reshaped the rhythms of life around it. Smaller predators avoided its territory. Scavengers followed it at a distance, hoping to feed on its leftovers. Herbivores learned to recognize the sound of its steady footsteps and adjust their movements accordingly. Their rise across Africa and Asia reflects the great creative energy of evolution during this era. As climates shifted and forests opened into woodlands, hyenodonts adapted again and again. Some became sprinters, others became long-distance hunters. A few grew smaller and more agile, slipping into niches left by earlier predators. Their lineage stretched across continents, marking territories that spanned thousands of kilometers. Yet the world around them continued to change. New carnivorous mammals, ancestors of modern cats, dogs, and hyenas, began to appear. These newcomers carried different jaw structures, different hunting styles, and new strategies shaped by the pressures of evolving herbivores. Grasslands expanded, forests thinned, prey grew faster, more alert, and more difficult to catch using the hyenodonts' traditional methods. For a time, they shared the land with these rising predators, but slowly, across millions of years, the hyenodonts began to fade. Their strength, once unmatched, no longer fit the increasingly dynamic landscapes of the later Cenozoic. Their long jaws and specialized teeth, so perfect for earlier worlds, became less suited to the challenges of new environments. Still, the memory of the hyenodonts remains written in stone. Their fossils reveal a world where early mammals tested fierce and elegant designs. They show us predators that ruled continents before the cats, before the wolves, before the creatures we know today. And their bones whisper of an ancient age when dominance looked different, moved differently, and carried a presence shaped by the deep patience of time itself. In the quiet glow of the early Eocene, when forests covered much of the world in layered green, a small creature stepped lightly across the soft soil. It carried the early shape of what would one day become one of Earth's most iconic animals. Yet in this ancient time, it stood no taller than a house cat. Its name, given long after it vanished, was Eohippus, the dawn horse. It moved through the forest with delicate certainty, guided by senses tuned to a landscape filled with shadows, filtered sunlight, and the gentle rustling of countless leaves. Eohippus did not resemble the horses we know today. Its body was compact and agile, suited for weaving between branches and fallen logs. Its legs ended in several small toes that spread slightly when they touched the ground, giving it stability on soft forest floors. These toes helped it stay balanced on uneven terrain, where roots and damp leaf litter created a patchwork of textures beneath its feet. Its head was short, with large eyes positioned to watch for movement in the dim undergrowth. Its teeth were shaped for eating leaves, fruit, and tender shoots rather than grass. The forest was its home, a dense and humid world filled with towering trees, hanging vines, and patches of sunlight that drifted slowly across the ground. Birds called from the canopy. Early primates leapt between branches. Insects glowed on warm nights. Small mammals scurried through the brush. In this crowded and vibrant environment, Eohippus relied on speed and agility more than strength. It darted between bushes when danger approached, and froze when shadows moved in unfamiliar ways. Its evolution had been shaped by forests that offered safety through concealment. The dawn horse did not need height or long legs. It needed awareness, nimble steps, and a body suited to twisting quickly in tight spaces. These traits were answers to the world it lived in, a world where early predators watched from low branches or crept silently through the undergrowth. Eohippus survived by knowing its forest intimately, learning the smell of fresh leaves, the sound of distant footsteps, and the safest paths through the thickets. But the forests of the Eocene were not permanent. Earth's climate, which had been warm and stable for millions of years, slowly began to shift. These changes were subtle at first, felt only in slightly cooler seasons or in the gradual thinning of certain tree species. Over long stretches of time, however, the transformation grew more pronounced. Atmospheric carbon levels began to decrease, the poles cooled, rainfall patterns changed. Where once forests had stretched without interruption, open patches began to form. These open spaces were small at first, appearing along riverbanks or in areas where soil became too dry to support dense trees. But as the climate continued to cool, the spaces widened, woodlands thinned, grass species, which had once been minor components of plant communities, began to spread across the land. They were tough, flexible plants that thrived in environments where trees struggled. Eohippus and its descendants felt these changes deeply. The forest could no longer provide everything they needed. Some individuals remained in shrinking woodlands, adapting to new plant types that emerged as climates shifted. Others ventured into the edges of the newly forming plains, exploring stretches of land where grasses grew tall and wind stirred the air with different scents. Over countless generations, those that ventured into the open evolved new shapes. To outrun predators in open terrain, their legs grew longer, their toes fused into single, stronger structures that acted like springy pillars, perfect for running long distances at high speeds. Their teeth changed as well. Instead of grinding leaves, their molars developed harder enamels suited for wearing down the tough blades of grass that now dominated the plains. Climate guided these transformations gently but completely. As forests retreated, the horses grew larger, their bodies stretched in height and length, their heads elongated to support more powerful chewing muscles, their senses sharpened to detect danger from far away, where trees no longer softened the shapes of predators. The once tiny, forest dwelling lineage gave rise to animals that could sprint across vast open landscapes, covering great distances with graceful strides. In the fossils of these ancient horses, scientists read the story of Earth's changing climate. Short-legged forest dwellers appear in layers of rock that once held dense vegetation. Slightly taller forms appear in rocks that mark the first open woodlands. Long-legged, single-toed horses appear in the geological record when grasslands spread across continents. Each transition in body form reflects a transition in the world around them. The dawn horse, Eohippus, represents the beginning of this long and winding journey. It lived in a time when forests shaped every part of its existence. Its delicate steps, soft eyes, and small size were perfect for the world that embraced it. And although that world gradually faded, the lineage it began continued to adapt, learn, and thrive as Earth shifted beneath changing skies. By following the path of these early horses, we follow the planet's slow breath as it transitioned from warm forests to sweeping plains. Their evolution is a quiet map of global transformation, drawn not in ink but in bone and time. As the Eocene world stretched onward, carrying with it warm forests, ancient predators, and the early experiments of mammalian life, a subtle change began to pass through the air. It was not sudden. It arrived quietly, like a soft exhale drawn from somewhere deep within the planet. Oceans shifted their currents, winds rearranged their paths, and the earth, which had been warm for millions of years, began to cool with a slow patience that only deep time can hold. Far beneath the continents, tectonic plates continued their steady drift. They had always moved, but now their positions began to create new patterns in the sea. Land masses shifted inch by inch, adjusting the shapes of coastlines and the depths of basins. The opening and closing of passages between oceans guided currents into unfamiliar routes. Cold water flowed along paths once kept warm. Warm water pooled in isolated regions where it could no longer circulate freely. These currents acted like the planet's bloodstream. When they changed direction, the entire climate felt their influence. Regions that had basked in steady warmth began to experience cooler seasons. Rainfall patterns altered. Forests that once grew without interruption faced new challenges as air temperatures dipped slightly each year. None of these changes altered life immediately, yet each small shift nudged the world toward a new trajectory. At the same time, the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere began to fall. For millions of years, volcanic activity and organic decay had kept CO2 high, warming the planet and allowing tropical environments to flourish across continents. But now, weathering processes increased as continents rose and erosion deepened river valleys. Rocks exposed to rain and air absorbed carbon from the atmosphere. Plant life also shifted its patterns, drawing in carbon more efficiently as ecosystems matured and expanded. Even the burial of organic material contributed, locking carbon into sediments where it would remain for ages. With less carbon in the air, sunlight reflected differently from Earth's surface. The atmosphere trapped less heat. The long decline began gently, like a soft curtain lowering across a once blazing stage. Temperatures did not collapse. They drifted, year by year, generation by generation, toward a cooler state. The heat of the early Eocene still lingered, but a new balance was forming beneath it. The forests were among the first to respond. In places where humidity had once been constant, dry seasons grew slightly longer, Some leaves thickened to conserve moisture. Others shifted their growing periods to match changing rainfall. Flowers that once bloomed throughout long warm seasons adapted to narrower windows of time. These changes formed a quiet dialogue between plants and climate, shaping new communities that would guide the evolution of animals in the millennia ahead. In regions closer to the poles, the cooling was more apparent. Rainforests remained, but subtle differences began to shape them. Frost touched certain valleys for the first time in ages, though it melted quickly. Animals that lived in these regions adapted by growing slightly thicker fur or altering their seasonal habits. Even insects shifted their breeding cycles to align with the cooler nights. The oceans carried some of the most profound changes. As cold water coursed through new routes, nutrients rose from the depths along different shores. Certain marine life flourished in the mixing of temperatures. Other species, adapted to stable warmth, drifted into extinction. Coastlines experienced shifts in storm patterns, guiding the evolution of early whales, fish, and seabirds in subtle but significant ways. Across continents, herbivores responded to the cooling climate by adjusting their feeding ranges. Where forests thinned, open woodland spread. Some species grew taller to browse from higher branches. Others developed stronger limbs suited for traveling longer distances in search of food. These changes whispered of a future where grasslands would eventually expand, though that moment still lay far ahead. Predators also felt the transformation. Their prey began to move differently, altering the landscapes they frequented. Some carnivores adapted by expanding their territories. Others refined their hunting strategies or shifted to areas where forest canopies remained thick and stable. Every creature responded in its own way, shaped by interactions that reflected the gradual cooling. The long decline in temperature did not empty the world of its warmth. Rather, it brought balance to extremes that had defined earlier ages. The earth settled into a gentle arc of transition, preparing for the great shifts that would come in later epochs. Rivers continued to flow. Forests still rose in green layers. Life remained abundant and diverse. But beneath the visible world, the deep systems of the planet were rearranging themselves. This slow cooling marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would reshape continents, ecosystems, and the direction of evolution. It brought gentle clarity to a world that had once been dominated by lush, unbroken heat. And as the skies breathed more softly, the earth moved steadily toward a future where change would carve new paths across every landscape touched by wind, water, and time. As the cooling that began in the Eocene continued its quiet work across millions of years, the earth slowly shifted into a new chapter. This chapter would later be known as the Oligocene, a time when the world shed much of its ancient warmth and stepped into a landscape shaped by open spaces, changing winds, and new forms of life. The transition unfolded gently, not in sudden waves but through countless seasons that carried the slow rhythm of drifting clouds and lengthening shadows. Forests that once stretched unbroken across continents began to thin. The dense canopies of earlier ages loosened, letting more sunlight reach the ground. In places where trees had stood for generations, patches of open woodland appeared, revealing stretches of soil where grasses began to take root. These grasses were hardy, able to survive the cooler nights and reduced rainfall that marked the new climate. They spread patiently, forming narrow meadows that widened year after year. As forests receded, a sense of distance entered the landscape. Where once every view ended in green curtains of leaves, now horizons opened. Rolling plains appeared, dotted with scattered trees that cast long shadows during the morning hours. Winds, once softened by thick vegetation, moved more freely across the land. They carried with them the scent of dry earth, distant rain, and the clusters of flowering plants that grew along the edges of rivers and lakes. The rise of these open spaces brought profound changes to the animals living within them. Herbivores, long accustomed to browsing in shaded forests, found themselves walking greater distances in search of food. Leaves grew less abundant. The soft shoots and fruits that once filled the forests no longer appeared in every season. Instead, grasses offered a new source of nourishment. They were tougher, filled with silica, and required stronger teeth and longer limbs to manage. Over time, herbivores adapted to meet the challenge. Their bodies grew taller, allowing them to see farther across the open plains. Long legs replaced short, sturdy limbs, helping them travel more quickly between grazing areas. Their necks lengthened slightly, granting them the ability to reach both low grasses and the leaves of isolated trees. Some species developed deeper jaws and stronger enamel, evolving teeth able to grind the coarse blades of grass that were becoming more common. These changes did not happen in isolation. As herbivores adapted to open plains, predators followed the same shifting path. The dense forests had once allowed ambush hunting, where silent steps and sudden leaps shaped the rhythm of the chase. But in the expanding grasslands, stealth alone was no longer enough. Predators needed speed. They needed endurance, and they needed sharper senses tuned to movement across great distances. Carnivores began to develop longer limbs and lighter bodies. Their strides lengthened, their vision sharpened. Some learned to pursue prey over stretches of land where cover was scarce, relying on stamina as much as surprise. Others maintained ambush strategies at the edges of woodlands or near watering holes, using the remaining patches of trees as anchors for patience and precision. These adaptations marked the early steps toward the fast, open country predators that would one day dominate later ages. The interplay between herbivores and predators shaped the character of the Oligocene landscape. Herds moved with greater coordination, their safety dependent on collective awareness. Young animals learned to recognize distant shapes on the horizon. Adults positioned themselves carefully at the edges of grazing groups. Predators studied these patterns, adjusting their strategies generation after generation. With each passing era, the climate continued its slow shift. Cooler temperatures encouraged the spread of grasslands across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. Some regions maintained pockets of dense forest, especially near rivers or in sheltered valleys, but the world's overall texture leaned steadily toward open terrain. This transition gave rise to animals uniquely suited to life on broad, sunlit plains. Among these emerging forms were early relatives of modern horses, camels, and antelope-like herbivores. Their legs stretched longer than those of their ancestors. Their bodies grew leaner and more aerodynamic. They moved with a rhythm shaped by long distances and open air. Their survival depended on speed, awareness, and the ability to read the shifting patterns of wind, grass, and shadow. Predators, too, refined their designs. Some became sprinters with powerful bursts of energy. Others practiced patient tracking across miles of scrubland. Their senses became attuned to faint vibrations in the ground and the scent of herds carried on distant breezes. The Oligocene world felt different from the warm, enclosed forests of earlier times. It breathed more openly. It carried greater contrast between night and day, between season and season. The interplay of light and space changed how animals lived, moved, and interacted. And through these transformations, Earth revealed a new landscape shaped not by lush abundance alone, but by adaptation to change. The thinning of forests and the rise of grasslands marked the beginning of ecosystems that would come to define the planet for millions of years. In this emerging world, life adjusted its forms and rhythms, stepping gently into the future carried by wind, sunlight, and the slow turning of time. As the Oligocene world continued to open into broad plains and quiet stretches of grassland, a new kind of creature stepped into view. Their shadows stretched long in the morning light. Their footprints pressed deeply into the earth, and although early observers would later nickname them hell pigs, they were not pigs at all. They belonged to a lineage entirely their own, distant cousins to hippos and whales, shaped by a world that was learning to balance speed, strength, and hungry opportunity. These animals, known as Entelodonts, carried a presence that felt both commanding and quietly unsettling. They stood tall on long, sturdy legs, giving them the height to scan the grasslands the way a keen-eyed hunter might watch the horizon. Their bodies were broad and muscular, built to endure long distances beneath the shifting sun, but it was their heads that left the most lasting impression. The skulls of these animals stretched to remarkable lengths, sometimes approaching the size of a grown person from chin to crown. They were reinforced with ridges and flared cheekbones that supported powerful jaw muscles. The jaws themselves were packed with teeth suited for many tasks, from slicing through flesh to cracking open bones that other scavengers could not touch. These skulls told a story of strength and versatility. In a world where food sources varied with the seasons and where competition came from every direction, entelodonts were shaped to take advantage of almost anything they encountered. They were omnivores, comfortable shifting between roles as hunters, scavengers, and foragers. If a herd animal fell behind its group, an entelodont could pursue it with surprising speed. If only bones remained of a long finished carcass, the creature's jaws could snap them open with ease, reaching the nourishing marrow inside. They ate roots, small animals, eggs, and even the occasional fruit when it was available. Few animals in their environment embodied adaptability as completely as they did. The plains where entelodonts lived were alive with movement. Herds of early horses, camels, and rhinoceros-like mammals grazed in scattered groups, shifting location as grasses grew or dried. Predators stalked these herds with careful patience, watching for weakness or distraction. Scavengers followed behind, hoping to find what was left after the chase. In this busy and competitive world, entelodonts carved out a niche defined not by specialization but by opportunity. Their height offered them a wide view of their surroundings. They could track the flight of birds that circled above distant carcasses. They could see dust rising where a herd had been startled or broken apart. They walked with a sense of calm authority, well aware that few animals dared challenge them. Even larger herbivores stepped aside when an entelodont approached, sensing the potential danger in those deep-set eyes and heavy jaws. Although they could hunt, they often chose not to waste energy unless the chance of success was high. Instead, they followed the rhythm of the plains, watching, waiting, and taking what the landscape offered. They might shadow a pack of smaller predators, letting the pack do the difficult work of bringing down prey. When the moment felt right, the entelodont would approach, its confidence enough to send the pack scattering. The remains would become its meal, and its jaws would make quick work of whatever bones or sinew remained. Their bone-crushing ability gave them an advantage many other animals lacked. It allowed them to access hidden pockets of nutrients that others could not reach. Over generations, this trait shaped their lineage, reinforcing the wide zygomatic arches of their skulls and deepening the grooves where jaw muscles attached. Their heads took on a blocky, almost architectural quality, as if built to withstand enormous pressure. Yet despite their formidable presence, entelodonts were not simply brutes. Their long legs and surprisingly agile movements showed a creature adapted to travel across great distances. They roamed the plains in wide arcs, tracing patterns of migration, climate, and scent. Their territories overlapped with those of many other species, and through this overlap, they played a vital ecological role. They cleared carrion that might otherwise attract disease. They controlled populations of smaller animals. They redistributed nutrients across the landscape as they traveled. Their success lasted for millions of years. Each generation carried the lessons of its ancestors, shaped by shifting climates and the slow transformation of the land. But as the world continued to cool and as newer, faster predators began to appear, the age of the entelodonts slowly faded. Their lineage left no direct descendants, only fossils scattered across the plains they once ruled. Even so, their presence lingers in the story of Earth. These towering omnivores were among the first mammals to dominate open landscapes with both power and adaptability. Their skulls, heavy and intricate, remind us of a time when creativity in evolution took the form of giants who could crush bones, chase prey, and stand unchallenged beneath the wide Oligocene sky. As the land continued its slow reshaping during the Oligocene, the oceans were undergoing a transformation just as profound. While grasslands spread across continents and new predators learned to run beneath open sky, an entirely different kind of revolution was unfolding beneath the waves. It had begun millions of years earlier with creatures like Ambulocetus, the walking whale, whose heavy limbs carried it between shorelines and shallow inlets. With each generation, those limbs grew more suited for swimming than walking. Bodies stretched, tails strengthened, and step by gentle step, a lineage of land mammals drifted farther from the shore until the sea became their only home. By the time the Oligocene dawned, this transformation had accelerated into something extraordinary. Early whales no longer looked like their ancestors. Their legs, once sturdy and weight-bearing, had reduced into small remnants tucked beneath sleek bodies. Their tail vertebrae expanded and flattened, forming powerful flukes that swept through the water with fluid strokes. Spine and ribcage shifted into shapes that moved with the currents rather than resisting them. These changes allowed them to travel long distances with little effort, carried by the push and rhythm of deep water. The oceans of this time were warm, enriched by nutrients from shifting currents and volcanic activity along the sea floor. Plankton bloomed in great clusters that fed fish and squid, which in turn drew predators from far and wide. Into this lively world swam the early fully aquatic whales, creatures whose presence would alter ocean life forever. Some of these whales, like the early basilosaurids, elongated into serpentine forms that glided with smooth movements. They hunted with sharp teeth and keen senses, navigating through open water with confidence. They no longer needed the support of land. Their bodies had surrendered every trace of terrestrial life, embracing an existence shaped entirely by buoyancy, depth, and the steady pulse of ocean currents. But the most remarkable part of their story was not only their shape, it was the growing complexity of how they sensed their world. Over countless generations, some whales began to develop structures within their heads that allowed them to create and interpret sound in a new way. Instead of relying solely on vision, which faded in deep or murky water, they could project clicks and listen to the echoes that returned. These echoes carried information. They mapped the world in sound. They revealed the hidden movements of fish, the shapes of distant rocks, and the approach of predators. This ability, known as echolocation, changed everything. With it, whales could hunt in darkness, dive deeper than any mammal had ever ventured, and understand their surroundings with astonishing clarity. The ocean, which had once been ruled by reptiles during ancient ages, now felt the quiet rise of a new kind of dominance. Mammals, guided by sound and propelled by powerful tails, began to take control of marine food webs. Other whales evolved toward filter feeding, a strategy that would later give rise to giants. Although the earliest versions of this lifestyle were still forming, the concept had begun. Instead of chasing swift prey, these ancestors swam through dense clouds of small organisms, using broad mouths and specialized structures to capture food in gentle sweeps. Over time, this approach would shape the largest creatures ever to live, but even in its early form, it signaled a shift in how mammals shaped the sea. As whale evolution expanded in different directions, the oceans themselves adjusted. Predators that once ruled shallow waters found themselves confronted by faster, larger, more intelligent rivals. Schools of fish changed their behaviors, learning to move in tighter formations to avoid detection. Squid populations shifted their ranges, following currents that carried both opportunity and danger. Even the distribution of nutrients across the seas changed as whales traveled through open water, diving deep and returning to the surface, mixing layers of the ocean with their movements. The presence of these new marine mammals created a balance between surface and depths that had never existed before. Their diving patterns transported nutrients upward, supporting plankton that fed countless species. Their large bodies, when life eventually ended, sank to the seafloor where they nourished ecosystems that depended entirely on such rare gifts. In this way, whales became not just predators or travelers, but architects of the ocean's future. As the Oligocene progressed, the oceans grew quieter in some places and fuller in others. Whales sang through deep canyons. They glided along coastlines shaped by shifting continents. Their young learned the rhythm of waves and the pathways of migration. And through all of this, the story of Earth widened to include a new kind of mastery. Mammals had already taken to the land with confidence. Here, beneath the blue surface, they claimed the sea as well. The transformation that began with a creature stepping awkwardly between water and shore had reached a point of no return. The oceans would never be the same. They now carried the presence of beings shaped entirely by water, guided by sound, and connected to the heartbeat of the deep. As the Oligocene world continued its slow drift toward cooler winds and longer seasons of dryness, Africa began to change in ways that reshaped every creature living upon it. For millions of years, the continent had been a kingdom of giants. Great herbivores moved through wide floodplains and swamp forests. Brontotheres stood like living boulders among tall reeds. Arsinoitherium carried its twin mountain-like horns through steaming wetlands. Their presence had given the landscape a sense of weight and age, as if the earth itself breathed through the rhythms of their movements. But as the climate shifted, the land that once cradled these giants began to soften and crack beneath their feet. The first signs were subtle, felt more than seen. Rainfall patterns changed, wet seasons shortened. Forests that had grown thick for countless generations began to thin at the edges. Trees that relied on consistent moisture dropped their leaves more often. Palms and broadleaf plants slowly retreated toward deeper river valleys, leaving open stretches of ground that had rarely seen sunlight. The air, once heavy with humidity, grew lighter. Winds traveled farther before meeting resistance from vegetation. The giants felt these changes in quiet ways. Brontotheres, once surrounded by lush growth, now walked greater distances to find the soft shoots they favored. Their large bodies, shaped for stability rather than endurance, struggled with longer journeys. Arsinoitherium faced similar challenges, Their swamp forests shrank. Pools that once remained filled year-round began to dry during certain months. The deep mud that supported their weight thinned into firm ground that carried fewer edible plants. Rivers, too, shifted their paths. What had been broad, wandering waterways narrowed into precise channels. Some tributaries vanished entirely, leaving behind cracked beds where crocodiles and turtles once glided. Floodplains shrank. The great seasonal surges that had replenished food sources no longer reached as far across the land. Without these predictable floods, the ecosystem lost one of its most important rhythms. Cooling air altered Africa's skies. Clouds changed shape and pattern. Storms that once swept across entire regions became smaller and less frequent. As temperatures declined, the continent began a long journey toward the landscapes we recognize today. Woodlands opened. Grasslands formed in scattered pockets. And with every passing generation, the giants found themselves living within spaces that no longer matched the body's evolution had given them. Their size, once a strength, slowly became a burden. Smaller herbivores adapted more quickly. They could navigate new vegetation patterns. They could shift their diets. They bred faster and dispersed into fresh environments that were forming across the continent. Predators, too, adjusted their strategies as habitats changed, moving into open terrain where speed mattered more than ambush. But perhaps the most profound pressure came from newcomers. As Africa's northern land masses drifted closer to Eurasia, land bridges rose and fell with tectonic movement and sea level change. These shifting connections allowed waves of new species to travel south, entering African territories that had been isolated for long stretches of time. From Eurasia came early relatives of rhinos, pigs, and antelope like grazers. Some were smaller and faster than Africa's giant herbivores. Others possessed teeth better suited to the tougher grasses that were spreading across the land. These new arrivals occupied niches that brontotheres and Arsinoitherium had once dominated. They moved easily through drying forests. They crossed long distances without exhausting their strength. They brought new strategies for feeding, competing, and avoiding predators. Over time, their presence reshaped the balance of life across the region. For the giants, the change was gradual but inexorable. Fewer young survived to adulthood. Food sources became less reliable. Their territories shrank as newcomers filled the spaces that once supported large, slow-breeding species. Brontotheres disappeared first, slipping quietly out of the fossil record as the cooling climate tightened its hold. Arsinoitherium followed. Their swamp forests, once vibrant and abundant, had transformed into drier plains that no longer supported their needs. The continent did not empty, it simply changed its cast. New grazers spread across emerging grasslands. Early carnivores from the north adapted to the open terrain and found success among the evolving herds. Rivers continued to shift, carving new paths that carried different species along their edges. Forests retreated into patches and corridors that supported primates, small mammals, and early ancestors of creatures that would later define Africa's story. Yet even as the giants faded, their legacy remained in the deep structure of the ecosystem. The landscapes they once shaped with their size and habits became the foundation upon which new worlds were built. Their bones settled into the earth, carried by the same winds and waters that had signaled their decline. Africa's transformation did not happen in a single moment. It unfolded through seasons, through migrations, through subtle changes etched across countless lifetimes. And in that slow unfolding, the ancient giants stepped softly out of view, leaving behind a continent ready to welcome new chapters in the long and gentle story of life. As Africa and the wider world continued to cool, the quiet transformations that had begun earlier in the Cenozoic deepened. Habitats shifted their shapes, grasslands broadened under open skies, forests retreated into smaller pockets of shade, rivers drifted into new paths as rainfall patterns stretched and thinned. Through these gentle and persistent changes, life answered with new forms that would one day feel familiar to us. This era carried the beginnings of the animals that now walk beside us, those who pad softly through forests, who graze on plains, who scurry through fields, and who thrive in nearly every corner of Earth. The ancestors of modern carnivores were among the first to step into this evolving world. Long before the sharp-faced cats and loyal dogs we know, there were small, agile hunters that moved quietly through woodland edges and early meadows. Their bodies were built lightly, with limbs suited for bursts of speed or careful climbing. Their senses sharpened as forests thinned, teaching them to read movement across greater distances. Early relatives of cats practiced stealth as they stalked prey among scattered shrubs. The first dog-like forms experimented with endurance, learning to follow scents across winding paths. The ancestors of bears roamed with broader appetites, investigating everything from insects to fallen fruit. Mustelid-like creatures, small but determined, explored burrows and tree roots with slender bodies that could slip into the narrowest places. These early carnivores were not yet the rulers of the food webs, yet their presence began to reshape ecosystems. They diversified in quiet steps, taking advantage of the new spaces created by cooling air and widening grasslands. Some hunted in daylight, using long horizons to spot opportunities. Others remained in forest shadows, blending patience with precision. Their teeth changed as well, reflecting the varied diets that helped them survive in landscapes that continued to shift beneath them. While these hunters were learning their craft, another group of mammals began a rise so successful that it would influence nearly every ecosystem on Earth. Rodents, small in size but unmatched in adaptability, found opportunity in every corner of the changing world. As grasses spread, seeds became more abundant, and rodents flourished. Their teeth grew specialized for gnawing. Their bodies remained compact and quick. They reproduced rapidly, allowing rapid adaptation to new conditions. Some climbed trees in the remaining forests. Others burrowed into soft soil at the edges of plains. Still others learned to swim and forage near rivers. Their success carried them across continents. With each shift in climate or landscape, rodents found a way to fit into new rhythms. They became essential players in ecosystems, spreading seeds as they traveled, feeding predators, and reshaping soil through their tunnels. Their quiet presence formed a foundation upon which many other species depended. As carnivores refined their hunting strategies and rodents expanded their reach, hoofed mammals continued their own transformations. Earlier in the story, these herbivores had lived in dense forests and swampy plains, but the growing grasslands called for a different kind of body. Limbs grew longer, lifting torsos higher above the ground. This change offered both speed and a wider view of the horizon. Necks lengthened, allowing for long hours of grazing. Jaws broadened and teeth strengthened, shaped by the need to process tougher grasses that had replaced softer leaves. These changes did not happen in isolation. The open plains encouraged herd behavior. Living in groups brought protection, since many eyes could watch for predators. Children learned quickly to run, gaining confidence as they traveled beside their mothers. Migration paths stretched farther as herds followed seasonal patterns of rain and fresh growth. Each journey helped distribute nutrients across the landscape as these animals grazed, moved, and grazed again. Different lineages explored variations of these traits. Some became swift runners, built for escape rather than confrontation. Others grew larger, relying on their size for protection. Early ancestors of horses, camels, antelope like herbivores, and deer all took shape during this long period of adjustment. Their forms reflected the environment itself, shaped by grasses, winds, and the deepening contrast between forests and plains. The interactions among these rising groups created a new dynamic balance in the natural world. Carnivores sharpened their senses and movements to match the growing speed of herbivores. Herbivores refined their cooperation within herds and honed their ability to detect danger. Rodents filled the spaces between these larger players, acting as silent gardeners and prey for predators big and small. Together, they wove an interconnected system that responded to climate, vegetation, and the endless flow of time. Although the giants of earlier ages were beginning to fade, the world did not grow empty. Instead, it filled with animals that carried the early outlines of the creatures we now know. Their shapes were not yet final, but their stories had begun. Earth was shifting into a new rhythm, one that favored adaptability over size, endurance over brute strength, and quick thinking over ancient stability. Through each season, the land continued its gentle transformation, and within that slow and steady change, the ancestors of modern carnivores, rodents, and hoofed mammals found the opportunities that would guide their descendants to someday walk, run, and forage across the entire world. As the long arc of the Cenozoic continued to bend toward cooler winds and changing skies, the world that had once nurtured the strange giants of earlier ages began to slip away. The lush Paleocene and Eocene landscapes, with their warm rainforests stretching across continents, had allowed bizarre mammals to flourish. They had risen in shapes that felt experimental, bold, and sometimes otherworldly. But Earth, moving according to its own slow rhythm, carried them into a future they were not built to endure. The cooling that began millions of years earlier deepened gradually. Air that had once drifted softly through dense foliage grew drier and crisper. The great tropical belts that had wrapped the planet narrowed. Forests that had formed vast, unbroken corridors broke apart into scattered regions, shrinking toward the equator or retreating into river valleys where moisture still lingered. Leaf litter thinned, tree canopies lowered. The world no longer offered the warm, sheltered expanses that many early mammals depended on. The giants of the Eocene had lived within these forests comfortably. Some browsed among high branches with heavy limbs and slow steps. Others relied on the thick vegetation for protection, moving quietly between shadows and dense undergrowth. But as the trees retreated, the familiar pathways of their lives changed. Open ground appeared between forest patches. Grasses advanced into areas that had not seen sunlight for countless generations. The world was becoming wider and brighter, shaped by open air rather than protective shade. For many of the old lineages, this shift brought new challenges. Their bodies, built for the soft rhythm of forest life, were not suited to long distances or the harsher nutrients of grassland plants. They could not outrun the predators that were beginning to adapt to open terrain. They could not easily find shelter when danger approached. And they struggled to follow the food sources that were now scattered across broader landscapes. At the same time, new groups of mammals were emerging with remarkable speed. These newcomers carried designs that fit the cooling world more easily. Carnivores developed faster reflexes and more efficient bodies for running. Herbivores grew longer legs, stronger enamel, and more flexible diets. Rodents, small and adaptable, expanded rapidly across changing habitats. These agile species filled niches that once belonged to the giants and did so with a speed that left little space for older forms to recover. Competition became sharper not through sudden battles, but through quiet, everyday challenges. A newcomer that could run farther to find water had an advantage. Another, that reproduced more quickly, could maintain stable populations through shifting seasons. A species that could switch its diet from leaves to grasses or roots could survive as forests continued to thin. These subtle differences accumulated over generations, gradually pushing the ancient lineages into more isolated corners of the world. Some of the strangest mammals lived on islands or in secluded valleys, where evolution had crafted them into shapes rarely seen elsewhere. These isolated species had flourished without the pressures that shaped animals on the broader continents. Their adaptations were specialized, delicate, and tied closely to their environments. When climates cooled or sea levels changed, these isolated ecosystems shifted abruptly. Some islands merged with larger landmasses, allowing new competitors to arrive. Others faced drought or sudden changes in vegetation that left their endemic species without the resources they needed. These ancient lineages, once protected by isolation, found themselves exposed. Without the flexibility of newer mammals, they could not adapt quickly enough. Their small populations, once stable in seclusion, dwindled. Over time, these unique creatures, shaped by millions of years of quiet evolution, disappeared from the earth. Their extinction was not a single event. It unfolded like a slow exhale across ages, carried by cooler winds, shifting continents, and ecosystems that slowly rearranged themselves. The world they belonged to was slipping away, replaced by one that favored speed, versatility, and endurance. What once had been a planet filled with experimental forms transitioned into one dominated by lineages that continue to thrive today. Yet the story of these vanished mammals is not one of loss alone. They shaped the landscapes through which they moved. They influenced the predators that hunted them and the vegetation that surrounded them. They left traces in the fossils that rest beneath our feet and in the evolutionary echoes carried by their distant descendants. As the earth cooled and the forests withdrew, the age of bizarre mammals passed gently into memory, leaving behind a world ready to be shaped by new forms, new rhythms, and new stories carried forward by the ever-changing life of the planet. As the Cenozoic continued to unfold and the world settled into new rhythms of climate and life, the strange age of early mammals gradually slipped into the background of Earth's story, yet it never vanished entirely. Its echoes linger in the bodies and behaviors of the animals that surround us today. Its traces lie within the fossil beds scattered across continents, and its legacy remains woven into the quiet patterns of evolution that shaped the familiar creatures of the modern world. Even now, long after the forests of the Paleocene and the humid realms of the Eocene have faded, the mammals of today carry subtle reminders of that earlier, stranger time. Horses, for example, still reflect the long journey from tiny forest dwellers to grassland runners. Their legs, stretched and tapered, whisper of ancestors that once darted between tree trunks before learning to move across open plains. The way their hooves strike the ground traces a lineage that adapted to harder soils, longer distances, and predators who could chase rather than ambush. Other herbivores resemble the giants that once dominated warm, forested landscapes. Rhinoceroses carry hints of ancient horned beasts, not through direct descent from forms like Arsinoitherium, but through similar pressures that shape their size and strength. Their heavy bodies, broad shoulders, and deep chests echo a world where mass offered protection and stability. Even the slow, swinging gait of elephants reflects a time when large herbivores used careful, deliberate steps to navigate dense vegetation. Predators carry these echoes as well. Cats, with their soft footfalls and precise movements, reflect hunting strategies first explored when forests offered shadows for stalkers. Dogs and wolves carry endurance in their bones, shaped by countless ancestors who learned to pursue prey across widening grasslands. Bears inherited the ancient balance between plant and animal diets, a reminder of early carnivores that adapted to shifting environments by widening their appetites. Rodents, now among the most widespread mammals on Earth, continue the legacy of early generalists who learned to thrive in both forests and open spaces. Their teeth, forever growing and shaped for gnawing, speak of a world where survival belonged to those who could consume what others overlooked. Their quick breeding cycles echo a time when adaptability was more valuable than size or strength. These traits are threads of memory. They connect the animals of today to a world that once brimmed with creatures whose shapes now seem unbelievable. But the fossil record preserves a fuller memory, not only through surviving traits, but through forms that left no descendants at all. Layers of stone hold the remains of brontotheres with vast, intricate skulls, chalicotheres with claws built for gathering branches, and entelodonts with jaws capable of crushing bone. Their skeletons reveal bodies that stretch the limits of what mammals could become. They preserve experiments in size, diet, and movement, each one shaped by the climate, vegetation, and competition of its time. Some of these experiments succeeded for millions of years, flourishing across continents. Others appeared briefly, then vanished when conditions changed. Their presence in the fossil record helps to trace the winding path of evolution, a path filled with branches that expanded, merged, or ended quietly. The bones themselves speak gently of possibilities tested and abandoned. They show the resilience of life, but also its fragility. Even the strange early whales, whose ancestors once walked along the shoreline, leave their story in stone. Their skeletons reveal the gradual shrinking of limbs, the lengthening of bodies, and the formation of powerful tails that transformed them into creatures of the deep. These fossils remind us how quickly life can take a new direction when landscapes shift and opportunities open. The patterns etched in rock share a truth as calm as it is profound. Evolution does not follow a straight line. It wanders. It experiments. It builds forms that may last or dissolve. Every creature is shaped by countless generations that lived before, each carrying abilities that fit particular moments in time. Modern mammals are no exception. Their bodies hold the quiet signatures of ancient climates, vanished forests, expanding plains, and predators and prey that no longer walk the earth. They carry the memory of the strange age when mammals first rose into greatness, when evolution tested shapes the world had never seen. And although those early giants are gone, their story remains alive in every step of a grazing animal, every leap of a predator, every track pressed into soil. The world we know today is built upon their legacy, shaped by both the experiments that flourished and those that faded like shadows at the edge of time. As we reach the quiet end of this long journey, it helps to pause for a moment and look back across the world we have wandered through together. We have followed Earth across millions of years, watching it shift from steaming forests to open plains, from warm oceans to cooler skies. We have seen mammals rise from tiny survivors hidden in the shadows of extinction and transform into creatures of every size and shape. Some grew into gentle giants, others became swift predators. Many carried traits that feel almost unreal, as if they belong to dreams instead of the real history of our planet. Yet all of them were part of a single, continuous story, a story shaped by climate, by chance, by shifting continents, and by the quiet persistence of life. And through every age, through every transformation, evolution found new paths to explore. Some of those paths lasted for millions of years, others flickered briefly before fading. The world has always balanced between creation and disappearance, between possibility and change. Even the most powerful creatures were shaped by forces far greater than themselves. The strange mammals that once dominated Earth remind us how fragile these paths can be. Their bodies carried the imprint of forests that no longer exist. Their movements reflected rivers that have long disappeared. Their stories unfolded in climates that would feel foreign to us today. They lived in worlds that vanished not in a moment, but through slow breaths of warming and cooling, rising waters and shifting winds. And when those worlds changed, the forms that had thrived within them changed as well, some evolving into new shapes, others stepping gently out of time. What remains is the world we know now, a world shaped by countless vanished worlds beneath it. Every modern mammal carries echoes of those earlier ages. Every landscape holds memories in its stones and soils. Even the air carries stories, written in patterns of climate that have cycled across deep time. We live in a present built from layers of ancient lives, each one influencing the next in quiet but powerful ways. As we drift together through this final moment, let yourself imagine the vastness of that history. Picture the early forests where small primates leapt through shadowed branches. Picture the wide floodplains where brontotheres moved in slow, deliberate steps. Picture the coastal shallows where walking whales first slipped into deeper water. These places are gone, yet their legacy continues to shape the animals we share the planet with today, and even the landscapes we see out our windows. If any creature from this long journey stayed with you, I would truly love to know. Maybe it was the towering Arsinoitherium with its twin mountain-like horns. Maybe it was the quiet strength of Chalicotheres, rising like gentle giants among trees, or the strange power of Andrewsarchus along ocean coasts, or the small, early primates weaving their way through ancient canopies. Each viewer carries a different moment from deep time in their imagination, and hearing yours is part of what makes this little corner of the world feel connected. So if you feel comfortable, share in the comments which extinct mammal captured your curiosity the most. Your thoughts help bring these forgotten ages back to life in a way that facts alone cannot. And if you enjoy these calm journeys into deep time, these soft explorations of the worlds beneath our world, I would be grateful if you gently tapped the subscribe button or gave this video a like. It helps this peaceful space grow, and it lets the algorithm know that there is room on the internet for slow storytelling and quiet wonder. Every bit of support helps this community reach others who might be looking for rest, curiosity, or simply a moment of calm. Thank you for being here, for traveling across ages with me, and for allowing these ancient creatures to breathe again through your imagination. Earth's story is vast and fragile and beautiful, and there are so many chapters still waiting to be explored. So take a slow breath, let your shoulders loosen, and carry with you the quiet knowledge that our world is shaped by countless worlds that came before it. And when you are ready, we will drift together into the next deep time mystery.